Hey everybody, this is Ben from Pink Fohawk. For those who don't know, Pink Fohawk is an actual play podcast set in the Shadowrun universe, and we use 2nd edition. I thought maybe I'd provide a little bit of context as to why we're doing a 2nd edition book club for Shadowrun. For those of you that follow us on Twitter, you may already know this, but on Twitter, I would post pictures of my rulebook and of my different source books that I'm collecting, and people started coming out of the woodwork and responding with pictures of their books. And so I sort of jokingly threw it out into the world to say, we should start a 2nd edition book club where we just read the 2nd edition core rulebook and just go over it as a group. Out of nowhere, people started going, I'm in. And I started getting pictures of other people's rule books that they just bought the rule book. And I'm in. Here, look, I bought the 2nd edition rule book. When are we starting? And so then I started to feel a little bit guilty because I had no plans on actually doing this. I was hoping maybe somebody else would take that baton. But ultimately, what ended up happening was Tom Dowd, the Tom Dowd. For anybody who doesn't know, Tom Dowd is co-creator of Shadowrun. He is a writer and game developer. He helped develop Shadowrun from the ground up, from 1st edition, from the mechanics to the lore. He wrote multiple source books for Shadowrun. He wrote novels for Shadowrun. I mean, this guy, you can't go further back than Tom Dowd in terms of the development of Shadowrun. So when he responded and said, I'm in, I knew I had to do something. So I've been a part of the classic Shadowrun Discord server for quite a while. And so I thought this would be a good way to maybe bring people into the server and kind of help bolster that community a little bit and get people talking about old school Shadowrun again. And here's a group of people that love 2nd edition. Let's start this book club. I sort of scheduled just sort of an informal get together to sort of talk about the parameters of what this book club is. We kind of went over sort of how we're going to run it and what the expectations were and all that kind of stuff. I gave the assignment of, okay, well, let's all read the first 40 pages, which is basically all the introduction material, the short story at the beginning, the game concepts, all that stuff, all the way up to creating a character. We went off on our separate ways and we met up in a month later for our first official meeting, and Tom Dowd showed up, and it ended up being sort of more of a question and answer session where we just picked his brain for like 3 hours, and he was a super awesome sport about it. So now here we are. I just want to say again, just off the top, thank you to everybody who showed up and participated, but also special thanks to Tom Dowd, who is our hero, and is every Shadowrun fan. It's just like it's their dream come true to talk to the developer of Shadowrun about Shadowrun. So special thanks goes out to him. I think it's important to say that the book club is still open. I'll give details on how to join the Discord in the description below. Also, at the end of this video, we'll talk about sort of how you can do that. But thanks for watching, and hope you enjoy. So I don't know who all did their assigned reading. I'm assuming everybody, because we love this book. But
yeah, I read it. I reread it just earlier.
I could say I did, but like school's kind of a priority right now for me. So
I don't know where your head is at. What are you thinking?
It was funny because for me, like, I had not read some of this stuff in like 20 years. Because like I read it when it was new, and then I just sort of assumed I knew it all.
Only 20, huh?
I think 20. Seems like late 90s is probably the last time I read any of this.
Right. I'm going with late 90s being 20 years ago. Sounds good to me.
Right? That's 20 years ago. I don't know.
No, it's crazy though. Like, I've read this not even, let's see, it must have like probably like 4 years ago. And then I reread, I kind of glossed over it again before I started up my recent game. And like reading through it again, like just sitting down and like reading through it again for this, I've like caught so many things I missed, which was just, it was cool. It's already worth it in so many ways because I'm just like picking out cool details that I missed. And then the stuff that like Tom, you were talking about last time we talked, like about sort of how certain ideas came about and everything. It started to like, it was just really cool to see them in here, these details I missed, and know some of the context behind, how they were come about, So this is great. I'm already excited, more excited than I even was before about this.
So before we get like too far into this, how's the chances of us being able to record this?
The chances are good. I'm actually recording right now.
Awesome.
And if any, I kind of give everybody this disclaimer. If anybody wants to has any issue with that, just like DM me on the side or let me know, and we can not put it up anywhere. But that's the plan right now. Just because I've got a lot of people asking for future reference.
In my case, I have like about an hour before I have to head to work, so I was hoping I could keep listening from work.
We got you. No problem, man. All right. So I don't know. I guess if this is actually a pretty manageable group of people, not too many. So I feel like we could just like kind of freestyle it. But I asked people to grab like 2 things to sort of talk about, just to make sure, we have things to talk about and made sure everyone got a chance to talk if we had a lot of people. But I feel like we could just go through like section by section, just kind of just talk about it, if that works for everybody.
Works for me.
I'm all right.
Yeah, it works for me.
Fine to me.
Nice. First of all, I knew about Shadowrun before I read this core rule book, so I have a different perspective than like people that like bought this book day one and maybe this was their introduction to Shadowrun. But I do love the art in this thing, and I feel like without even reading it, you just look at these pictures and you're just like already seeing the promise of like just awesomeness. Like the first picture is a dragon, which I think is awesome for letting you know like what kind of shit you get into in this cyberpunk game and why it's different, which I think is great.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I've been looking at the first edition at the same time, just kind of trying to remind myself what I changed and maybe jog my memory about why. And there's a lot more Mayan art at the start of the first edition.
Yeah, the Mayan art in first edition was just so cool.
Mm-hmm. So it's clear that we were trying to emphasize that at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But then by second edition, we kind of pulled back from it.
Right. It went from Mayan art to suck cheese shark face pretty quickly.
Yeah.
That kind of raises a question for me, Tom. Like, was that a question of like, I've heard rumors over the years that Tim Bradstreet was like really expensive and that's why he was cut from later editions. And it was the Mayan art actually, was a budget a factor when you guys were putting this together?
No, I doubt it. The Bradstreet, if I remember correctly, Bradstreet did get more expensive because the White Wolf people latched onto him, rightly so. And they were, willing to pay, rightly so. But it was never, we never had budget problems for the art. We were always willing to pay pretty well. Obviously not a limitless, not a completely deep pocket. But Joel Bisk or Jim Nelson, one of those guys, or Lebenstein might be able to know more specifically, but I don't recall us saying, well, I guess I just said yes to your question, really, right? He got more expensive, so we weren't able to use him more as much. But we never, when you purchase art, you purchase the art. You could use it forever. So we never removed art later.
So the question, the rumor that I heard, and a lot of this is probably completely unsubstantiated fan rumor stuff, but I heard that's why Bradstreet didn't show up in third edition, was because like the rights to reuse his art in third edition would have cost more, and
that's possible, I suppose, because I think we learned a lot about writers' contracts as we went along, and it's possible that the initial contracts with some of those initial artists didn't cover some of that stuff. But I don't know for sure.
I've noticed that some of the 1E and 2E module art has been recycled. Like if you go to the website now and try the Shadowrun novels, the new covers are just recycled module art.
Was there any art reused in third edition? I've got a copy over here.
Off the top of my head, I can't say. Don't recall.
Bradstreet?
At all. I mean, I'm just
I
flipping.
feel like there were a couple of pieces, but like basically, I don't
I feel like
have
maybe
the
like
book.
some of the source books or something. Maybe there's some art. I'm trying to remember. Like
I'm flipping through third edition really fast here, and I'm not
It's all
seeing
new, huh?
anything reused.
Okay, so maybe that was the initiative. Was not using Bradstreet's art was too expensive. It was maybe like Bradstreet was 2E, where you have to do something completely new here.
It's possible. It's possible. There's there's one or two that look a little familiar, but the big difference for a lot of it, that's dated later too. There's a lot of the art has dates on it. Yeah, it looks like it's all new.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day in the chat. Like one of the things that I thought was really strong about second edition, to keep us on topic here, was like the art in second edition always felt really gritty to me. Like really like in the gutters, like it felt cyberpunk in a way that some of the later editions didn't quite hit that same note for me. And I think that was something I think really worked well for me as a like getting into Shadowrun the first time and flipping through the book, seeing all of the characters being like hunkered down behind a car while they're being shot at. The one that got the scan problem the other day, the street samurai the street shaman who's like painting his magic circle in the alley. That stuff, it felt so tactile. It felt so like there was a grit or a texture to it that really, really, really caught the mood to me.
There also seems to be a lot more grayscale artwork in third edition, where again, like we had talked about, a lot of first and second edition was very black and white,
High contrast.
Yeah,
very noir feeling.
Yeah, because even the layout, the page headers and stuff is all very strongly grayscale.
Well, while we're talking high level, like where did you guys find that font? Like that essentially, the font that is, it doesn't get used in other books, but it gets used all over second edition. Did you guys?
You mean
did you guys do this thing where you were like, well, let's find the perfect font, or did you just sort of open a font book and be like, that one looks good?
Yeah, the body font, like the font, like the body of the second edition core rulebook is like, we were talking about how it's just like so, like it's so easy on the eyes, like it's like soft and inviting, and a lot of times the print's even pretty like larger, so you can like, you're just not, it's not like exhausting to stare at this book. You're like, it's pretty easy read.
It's funny you should mention that, because I was actually thinking about that, and I meant to check with some of the art guys, because I don't remember what it is, but it's a font you can, it's not a custom. We got it somewhere, but I don't.
Yeah, I've been flipping through all the PDFs I bought of 4th and 5th edition, trying to find reused art. All I can really find is the ubiquitous Larry Elmore,
Right.
Dodger, Jack and M, that gunfight. And 4th edition is really the last edition where the art has any sort of grit. Everything in 5th edition is way too shiny.
Well, even 6th edition is very shiny too.
Because like in 4th edition, it actually used it was a good deal shinier than classic Shadowrun due to the higher tech level, but it was used to kind of build a contrast. Like one of the best bits of art in the 20th anniversary rulebook, I actually used to have a physical copy before I sold it, is in the distance you see this big shiny city, so clean and futuristic, but the foreground is just a bunch of homeless people huddled around a trash can fire.
Well, that's the thing with cyberpunk, right? It's like, what is it called?
The future came, but didn't arrive for everyone.
Well, it's like high tech, low life. Like, it's like sweet new technology that can do amazing things, but like everyone's still living in misery, unless you happen to be like, part of the top of society.
In the comfy bosom of the corpse.
That'd be the wage slave. All the way up.
So going back to like, well, I guess we can go back to the book now. So if we start with like Welcome to the Shadows, which we can talk about, I know it's just a page, but I feel like it's important to point out, I don't want to start any edition wars or anything. That almost already started in the chat earlier. I don't want this to be anything where we bash on newer editions or anything, but this is obviously celebrating second edition and like our love for it. And I like that this edition is sort of a cleaner. It says right in the beginning that it's a revision of the original Shadowrun rules, and it's not it's not a new rule set. It's a streamlining and cleaning up of the rules of the first one. To me, I think that's. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
I was going to say you have to. So it was funny. If you had asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have put the second edition a year or so earlier than it actually was. It's 92. I would have said it was 91 because it felt like as soon as we got first edition out, we started thinking about revisions, which then was relatively unheard of, right? I mean, AD&D, D&D, second edition, so on and so forth. But that the fact that we were thinking about, well, we're going to need to do another version of it in a couple years was unusual. And it was scary a little bit because how would the market react, right? How would, to come out and say, hey, we're doing a top to bottom fix on it. But we knew it needed it because first edition got developed so quickly. It didn't get play tested enough. It had a limited play test because we had such a short actual writing period on it, thanks to the original Cyberpunk. So, we knew we were going to have to play with it. In my head, it was sooner than 92, but I may be thinking of when I was finished with it.
Right. It probably felt like it. It probably felt like you guys got this thing done so fast. You just finished your first huge Herculean task, and now you got to go through another one. I'm reminded of like this like news story I heard as a kid when they were talking about the Super Nintendo that came out, and they were parents that were pissed because they were like, well, my kids already have a Nintendo. Like, why did they make this new Super Nintendo? And I could just imagine like that's a really popular product. I can't imagine like, yeah, you're worried that people are going to see a new Shadowrun book on the shelves just a couple years later.
Yep.
And how that might upset customers, like you're gouging them or something.
Well, that was a thing that came up in the chat as well. Like the market has changed in what we think is acceptable in like rolling out new editions of games all the time now was in the 90s. I can see people freaking out because they're like, oh God, I just bought this book 2 years ago.
Right. And it's interesting. I want to say to what we agreed to read the first 40 pages, and I don't want to get outside of that realm too much, but the end with all the errata, it is clear that you guys were so diligent on making it work with the original edition and making it all compatible. I mean, that is pretty awesome. I mean, must have been difficult, of course.
And not only is it like, people whose mentality might be like, oh, there's a new one and that this one's, I don't know. It's not even feeling like, oh, now you've got a new one or that it's better. It's like investment too, right? Yeah. Without having opened the book and read this page, I imagine a mentality might have been like, well, I just invested in this. I just bought these books. I just put this in. We even now in the day where we say nowadays you got editions left and right. Yeah, I still get that mentality. I still feel that way. I'm proven wrong every time, but I still feel that way.
And we were pumping books out, right? I mean, we knew. I mean, and a lot of those books were pretty heavy revisions, right? They were kind of 1.2 versions of a lot of the rules. So,
right.
We knew that we had to create an edition that was backwards compatible, but was forward looking. And it was a lot of work. And it's funny, again, thinking back, there's more stuff in it in the second edition that I pulled from other books than I remember. Like, if you had asked me, I would have put Shadowtech in second edition, not in first.
Well,
Right.
it kind of once again, I do love that second edition is backwards compatible because you don't get backwards compatible editions these days. Like,
Yeah.
you can just play, any of the first edition adventures, the classics, in second edition with a minimum of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think that's because most new quote editions aren't revisions of the same rules. They're new mechanics. They're new systems entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can tell the work that went into making this backwards compatible, but I do think one of the cool things about the first 3 editions of Shadowrun is that even third edition, which is, much more different than the differences between first and second. Like second edition is almost like the Romance language that once you learn that, you can cut. It's pretty simple to jump up or down from first to third, which I think is pretty awesome. So like all of the source books, if you collected all of those from first edition, like you can still look at them and use them, and a lot of them are information based anyway, with like Seattle and Native American nations, all that stuff still applies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it didn't change the game mechanic so much as it did. I mean, you were using it for information as a source book.
I had a joke when, like, the gaming group I played Shadowrun with in college, like that was when second edition was current. We had a joke that, like, if there was ever a question that somebody didn't know the answer to, that was probably in Shadowbeat, because the number of times that somebody would be like, well, what happens when you subscribe to cable? And somebody would be like, well, that's that's page 25 in Shadowbeat. They talk all about that.
Mm-hmm.
Shadowbeat's awesome.
Though I do actually, speaking of Shadowbeat, I find it hilarious that the large swaths of Shadowbeat were reprinted for a 6th edition product.
Really?
Huh.
Which one is that?
Well, it's one of those products that straddles editions. It straddles 5th and 6th. It's No Future. That's what it is.
And it has portions of Shadowbeat in it, you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much the entire mechanics of how to run a band is just Shadowbeat, but upgraded for the dice pool system used in 5th edition and 6th edition.
Well, that's
Forgot
interesting.
about the band rules, like basically where the rules about whether the audience was into your song or not.
Right.
That was so excellent.
Because 1st edition unironically had rocker boys.
Wait,
So
you guys
gotta
play
get
a
a
Shadowrunners?
Sasquatch.
You guys play as Shadowrunners? I play a band game. What are you talking about?
I'm a rocker. Sasquatch rocker boy.
Johnny Shaggy Hand.
So why did they remove things like Rocker Boys and other, like, staples over time?
The rocker boy wasn't in the first edition, was it? In the core rulebook. It
No.
wasn't. Yeah.
It was in like Sprawl sites, right?
Yeah, one of those, I think.
Yeah, it was in sort of one of the extended, like one of the source supplements.
Yeah, I mean, you spend a lot of time paying attention to what the audience is paying attention to, right? And it was the Rocker Boy kind of was a staple of Cyberpunk, the Talsorian game, and it didn't seem to be carrying over into Shadowrun that much. So I mean, we did Shadowbeat and pushed it there and some adventures and stuff, but it really wasn't. We didn't have people clamoring to do all that. If I remember correctly, we did Shadowbeat because Paul Hume was very, very eager to do it.
And I love Shadowbeat because it goes into a lot of the culture of the 6th world.
Yeah, sports and entertainment and all that cool stuff that you flavor your world with. It's all there.
Right, and like just like that section that we referred to constantly, like the telecoms and how telecoms exist in the average person's home.
Yep.
We went back to that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And Tom, you're talking about how the rocker boy didn't really somehow hit with the Shadowrun audience, and it's like to me, this is my personal opinion, but I feel like how specific the the lens is for Shadowrun. Like you are Shadowrunners, you know, you're mercenaries, that's your job. It's like very specific compared to, I feel like a lot of other RPGs where you're kind of, it's very open. You can be whatever. Here's all these different classes and different things you can be. Whereas Shadowrun, it kind of starts you right off pointed in a direction. Like you're a Shadowrunner, you're here to basically do crime. And so when I looked at, I came from Shadowrun and started reading through Cyberpunk after the fact, and it was like, it felt very all over the place to me. I was like, how do I get all these different people together, you know, and start a party with these guys? Like you got mercs, and you got medical guys, and you got a rocker boy, and you got a news person. Like you're gonna have to do a lot more work as a DM to loop these guys together, give them a common goal. Whereas
it's like the question, instead of being what kind of adventurer are you, it's you are a Shadowrunner.
That is answered in the title.
Exactly.
Well,
I feel the same way.
Version, like at least the editions that I've played, Shadowrun did a good job of like getting new players out the door running, so that like, you know, you can do that first adventure and like, you know, you already feel like your character is like an established thing. You're not like, you know, like run like 10 missions and then you'll hit level 2 and then you can do something. No, it's like, you know, every edition that I've played at least has always been like, you know, I can start a brand new character, I can join like a mission and be like, you know, pretty much what my role is supposed to be.
Right.
Which, like, you know, coming from D&D was weird because I was used to like, you know, starting out as like a level 1 with like, you know, my potential's not all used up, where Shadowrun is like, if I don't hit potential straight out of the, like my potential cap straight out of the box, then like I'm about to hit it, like, you know, it's just like one more inch sort of thing. And people were saying about how they were like, you know, you could expand horizontally as opposed to vertically, but sometimes you want a bit of room to grow.
Yeah, I was just, while you were talking, I was looking between first edition and second edition and the archetypes and what changed. Like, we pulled the burned out mage.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that until I was thumbing through it this last time. I kept digging through it and I was like, where did it go?
Burnout Mage was in the contacts booklet that came with the Game Master screen, so it was still there.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, a lot of people didn't pick up that product, so.
Yep, but like we added the bodyguard, the combat mage.
Yeah, combat mage was very popular in my group.
Yep. The dwarf mercenary and the orc mercenary got added. Weirdly, we kept the detective. I don't know why.
Because some guys ran a good old-fashioned noir detective story.
Yeah, I think
hard-boiled Shadowrun tale.
They tended to die.
That goes straight to the noir, right? Because...
Welcome to a more lethal Shadowrun detective.
I guess it was because there wasn't a formal ace archetype, so he's an expert thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think that was really, that's I think for me what kind of really compelling about those archetypes is that, like, some of them are really badass. Some of them are going to get stomped by the other archetype.
Right.
And when you put a group together, you got to kind of figure out, okay, so what's the detective's place in all this?
It goes to show you that combat's not everything.
Yeah, totally.
We spent a lot of time talking about that because a lot of games spend a whole bunch of time trying to make everybody balanced, right? But you just, you know, you go into combat and you can win in a different way. And our thinking was no, when you've got, you know, your wired street samurai and he's chrome to the gills, you need to worry. You know, if there's one or two on the other side. You need to think about how we're going to approach this. You can't just do the usual D&D thing of, we will wade in and see what happens and improvise. And
you mean my tribesman with horseback riding doesn't compare?
Especially with the brutal initiative. So, like the fact that these wired Sams can go 2-3 times before anyone else moves. You got to really approach that differently than just like, we run in.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and that's why what I don't like about the initiative system used in third and later editions, because it really devalues just how terrifying someone with move by wire or wired reflexes would be. Like, they can blend half your team before you can blink. Whereas in later editions, they move once, then you just gang up on them and beat them into the ground.
It really supports the lore, or vice versa, I suppose. The rules really support the lore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
There was a lot of criticism for that, right? It, exactly what you just said. It supported the lore, but there were a lot of players who didn't think it was fair. I'll flat out say because they wanted to play somebody, they want to have a street shaman who could stand toe to toe with the street samurai. It's like, well, you can if you pick your battle.
Right, and this is a thing that as a game master I kind of dealt with a lot, was like the in combat, generally speaking, the person who hits first wins the fight, which feels very accurate to like a real fist fight kind of situation. Like the person who punches first wins the fight. And the way that you would win if you were a street shaman who wanted to wipe out a street samurai is you catch them when they're not looking, and you're golden.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I love that dynamic.
If you think that's bad with fist fights, take gunfights.
Yeah.
It's just it's exponentially more so.
Yeah, what are you talking about? I can take a punch or two with a gun.
Right. So with players would pick up really quickly that they're like, I'm not gonna be able to kill this guy if he gets to the first round of a combat. So how do you get these elaborate plans, these really complicated player plans where they're like, okay, so we're gonna go in the night before and we're gonna set up like a sound trap, and they go through these things never happen in D&D for me, or they don't happen as much.
Yeah.
It creates a completely different game loop.
Well,
Yeah, 100%.
It's all fine and dandy till you roll the dice and it doesn't work.
And that didn't happen. Yeah.
Especially with the damage, the damage penalties. It's like, even if they didn't kill you, you just screwed your chances at fighting back,
Right. And because those wound modifiers will make sure you don't get a second chance.
Right.
So I thought it made in the 90s, like when this game came out, this was mind blowing to me as a player. The idea that like combat is over in one round or one or two rounds, and like you actually want to look more at like, you know what, he's gonna kill me if I attack him. So how do I get this guy?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just not how any of the other role-playing games that I had played at that point were structured. They were always, even like, I'm thinking about like the all the Rifts games and the Palladium games and D&D and all these other games. It'd be like, you get like more hit points as you get bigger. And with Shadowrun, you're like, you know what? A street punk could shoot me, get a really lucky roll, and I've been playing this for 2 years and my guy dies. I thought that was that was mind blowing.
The offset isn't you get more hit points. It's you don't have enough essence to do that anymore.
Right. You can die like Omar in The Wire, man. If you're not careful. Spoilers for people that haven't watched The Wire.
Oh, come on, man. I haven't watched it. I'm just kidding. Joke, man. Joke.
But the other thing is that the longer a game persists, the more it becomes a fight between what was originally intended and the way players want to play it. You know what I mean? So that what you're talking about is how we intended it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of player pushback from those who wanted the, I can play the detective and I will be victorious against the three street samurai. No, you're better off planting evidence in their apartment and calling Lone Star, dude. What are you talking about? That's what you're good at. Do that. No, I want to get, I want to roll out of my car and get into a gunfight. Okay. And then the players would try and modify the game to do what they wanted, it wouldn't work. You'd get complaints.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is as you go through different developers who have a different history, it changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, the developers who came after me all had a different experiences with the game, right?
It does, and like increasingly, what I've been trying to do with all RPGs is try and put myself in like, you know, different perspectives. Like not just thinking like if I use D&D as an example, yes, like Magic has been like OP for editions beyond editions, but as opposed to just like, you know, complaining that Magic is OP and then like just leave it at that, I started rebalancing my encounters. Like, you know, I stopped just using big bads that were wizards and I started using big bads that were like fighters. And normally they would just get wiped, but then they were smart enough to know that they would be able to take on like, you know, wizards that can just wipe them out of existence. So they would like, you know, get wizards of their own to just sit there and counterspell the player wizards as they were trying to do their thing. So it created it's like when you're playing Shadowrun and then there's like the physical realm, the astral, and then like the matrix realm. Is like if you just totally ignore the fact that there's an astral realm and that the shaman can summon like, you know, spirits and like muck around with the opposition, then yeah, the opposition is going to get knocked over all the time by like weird shaman spirit stuff. But if you consider that and you're like, hey, well, they know this is a thing, maybe they should have some sort of astral defense. Maybe they should have like some sort of matrix defense. And being able, especially with Shadowrun, to vary those so that you're not always walking into corps that have like great physical defense, but like crappy matrix defense, or like, you know, just vary around different corps, have different takes on things. So that it creates a varied experience for the players, and everyone gets their turn to shine more or less depending on the situation.
Yeah, Shadowrun really drove me to create encounters that felt more. They come across more real because you're trying to create like how would a corp protect this thing,
right? Like, you
know, and you're not so much trying to balance an encounter so much because they're never balanced. They'll always be. You don't want to get in a straight out firefight with anybody. So
really, you're not. You're not having like a bunch of gangers show up and go like, all right, these guys are like a-holes, and then they're just gonna like, you know, push the players around and expect the players to just like whip out their guns and like shoot them. If they want to do it, that's fine. But like, you're not going like, how many guys can the players take out?
Right.
You're going like, what feels right for these guys? Does it feel like right to have like 3 punks, or does it feel right to have 8? And let the players figure it out. If they like some punks pushing him like a player around, and then like, you know, the other players like, look, he has like 8 friends, they're gonna react differently than if he's just like trying to show off for his one girlfriend.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And there's a little bit of that. This is kind of one of the things I really enjoyed about this game, especially in its period of time, is like when you played D&D with your friends, you'd be like, there's a giant who appears and he seems to have a problem, and your D&D party would be like, we attack him. You'd be like, wait, no, that's not what I wanted out of that. With Shadowrun, you'd be like, there's a troll who appears, and everybody's like, oh shit, he might kick our butts.
Oh,
so
shit, we run.
Why don't we ask him what his problem is?
Right.
Anything we can help you with, sir?
Mm-hmm.
There's even a section in this toward the you know, behind the scenes section, I believe. I don't want to get too ahead of what we're supposed to be talking about, but it says basically that, if I was a GM tip, is it's like, go be hard on your players. Like do what they would come across if they were going to infiltrate a high security corporate. Make them have to figure out a way to get in. Don't think about ways they could get in terms of like trying to make it easy for them, trying to find ways, vulnerabilities, and see how a corporation would like seal those off.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm doing in one of my own campaigns, is that I am genuinely scared that at my next session, a lot of player characters will die. Because I'm playing the enemy is intelligent. His plan is to use a shape charge to blow the power to the target's house, then wade in with low light cyber optics and start gunning people down with a submachine gun. Only one of the characters has NVGs.
They're gonna love it.
It would be fun. That's the thing. It's like these corps that are you're not going to have one guard named Bob just walking around with a flashlight, right? They're going to have a serious security. So it's something I got to think about.
Well, and that also made me shape my encounters differently too, where it's like, because guards walking around with guns, like they'll just wipe my party right away. But also, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Sometimes the guard's most powerful thing is like a walkie-talkie. So like the first perimeter guards, I'll give them like radios and give the players that chance they're not getting shot right away. But if they get seen, like, things can start going to shit pretty quick.
Yeah, and you got to think in the corporate expendable asset mentality, right? That first ring of guards is the tripwire.
Right.
Right. They save the high threat response things for once they're inside the building and getting to places they shouldn't be.
Yeah, the second ring watches the first ring.
The first ring's job is to die loud.
Yeah.
It's not just to wait till they're inside. It's like, the high threat response team can't be like, if they're spread out all across the perimeter, they're not going to be that effective. So they're somewhere centralized, while like the other rent-a-cops are just kind of like patrolling with their flashlights and nightsticks. And then when one of them screams or something, then they orient towards that and they're like, okay, and they get ready. And then like they might not show up right away, but like, when they show up, it's going to hurt.
Right.
I think that was the draw. I know for my group when we started, right? Like I was, 92. We were in high school, and I had come from playing Top Secret SI, right? So it wasn't really D&D. My buddies played D&D and stuff. So that was more of a thinking game too, and that's what Shadowrun is. It's not the tactical game that D&D is, right? It started as a combat adventure game. So this was like, oh, okay, we can't go toe-to-toe with just, one street samurai could wipe everybody out. If you're not paying attention, it's more like, okay, now I need a face to talk to somebody, and maybe I can get a magician or something. Combat's not going to win.
Bringing me back with that Top Secret SI reference, man.
Hey, I haven't picked up the new one, New World Order, man. It's pretty good. All right. I got to find a group to play, though.
I'll have to look into that. But it's not just like, it's not that because combat is so dangerous that you have to avoid combat from all things. Like, a good street samurai could just like wait till the guard's alone and like, his buddies, like the door shuts between him and his buddies and you just like, grab him, throw him against the wall and like take him out. That's still a legit path forward. It's not like,
don't fight fair, chummer.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you come up with your plan, and then you roll the dice, and hopefully you get some sixes.
I will say here, don't fight fair, chummer. My two notes on this intro section, page 1 through 11, were both on page 8, and it's that I'm terrible with this, terrible with like specific quotes. You're never cut a deal with a dragon, I'm always looking for that. I hate to admit it. I don't have it ingrained in my head. I can never find the damn thing. I'm like, note to self. Page 8, whenever I'm looking for it. That was my first note, and my second, because I'm typically playing as DM GM. I'm a technical person. I know I love digging through books and finding the lore and stuff. Probably, admittedly, and how it came to pass is like my favorite part of any of these. Mm-hmm. And it's funny to me because I sit down and say, all right, I really want to read this. I really want to think about it. And I'm that asshole that pulls this open and goes, yeah, what's a role-playing game? Skipping that. Getting started. I know where to go. And so what I found hilarious to myself is when I sit to page 8, I find that and I go, well, that's where it's at. And secondly, I spend so much time trying to craft my own demonstration or like lead in to, let me tell you about Shadowrun. When I'll be damned if there isn't a really good single page write-up that I could just shut the fuck up and hand the book to someone.
It's so concise. That was my note, was that the year is 2053 is so concise. It breaks everything down that happened, how the whole world changed. And what I love about it is it goes into the magic. And then at the very end, it just goes right back to cyberpunk. At the very, very end, it tells you how this whole thing's different from cyberpunk. and then the last sentence or two twists it again to let you know, no, this is still cyberpunk. It's a great write-up. I felt the same way.
Yeah, those are definitely my notes. So I was like, and I know full well the reason it never came to mind is because I'm the type of person, and I mean, granted, I think I'm younger than most of you here. I was born a year before this book was released, so I love this thing.
This book was old before. Let me put it this way: Cyberpunk 2020 had been dead for years by the time I was born.
And I love that because I'm always, from my point of view, I'm always expressing to people, I'm like, realize that I did grow up in the age of cassette players. I do know what a dial tone is. And this is what real retrofuturism is. This is the late 80s interpretation of the future, this idea.
Right.
And I love
that. My favorite expression referring to it as the future of the past.
Right.
This is the future as it was imagined in the past. And so I think that's one of the things for me that I really like the aesthetic of the second edition Shadowrun because it's got the cables, and there's this scene in the movie Brazil, opening of the movie Brazil. If you haven't seen it, it's a great film. But there's a scene where they open on a commercial on the television is sitting in a store, and a man walks up and he says, "I'd like to talk to you today about ducts." And the whole movie, every building has elaborate duct work. So obviously they were making a joke about their movie, but I feel like Shadowrun, the Shadowrun second edition, the fact that everything has wires and cables and electronic stuff that's just ostentatious is kind of that. It reminds me of that. I'd like to talk to you about ducts. Only it's I would like to talk to you about the wired internet.
Sure.
Data jacks.
Yeah.
But that's another example of, I was talking about previously, that the longer the game is around, the more things evolve. Is, like you were saying, this was a vision of the future from, 1988 when we first wrote it. And by 1998, the vision of the future is different.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's things, you start to play that. Well, do you keep it as a quasi period piece, or do you evolve it to match what we know now of technology?
Yeah.
When Carl Wu, who was, he had 2-3 medical degrees, something like that, was writing cyber technology. He was writing stuff that he knew was down the road. And, in terms of science fiction down the road is what I'm talking about, right? Really advanced stuff. Nobody knew how to do it and wouldn't know how to do it in our lifetimes. But, and I was looking at that always going, man, is this too much? Or are we getting into BioWare too quickly? Or, is it too soon to get into this kind of stuff? And is it appropriate? Does it change how the game feels? We went with it; it was fine. But other developers and other publishers clearly thought they needed to push the bar farther down the road.
Real.
Yeah. Well, and just that wired wireless thing is,
Yeah.
By 98 or so, everybody's going, why the hell aren't things wireless? It's stupid.
Yeah.
Well,
I work in tech, and there are a lot of practical reasons why you could keep wires in. I have all sorts of justifications.
Well, but it's very hard to explain that to the person who's playing the game and picking up their phone.
Right.
And, reading a version of the rule book on their phone. And texting the guy across the table.
Right.
It's a tough sell.
Yeah, I actually had a problem with along that line where one guy I was interviewing for my campaign, he wanted to be able to do quick hacks like in Cyberpunk 2077, and was just so pissed off when I explained, no, the only way you could do that would be if the idiot hooked up their body comp to a radio or phone implant, which in universe is a very stupid thing to do.
Well, if you had access to micro drones, you might be able to land on him without him knowing, and then figure something out. But that's not going to be the walk into a room and then just start setting people on fire through the Matrix.
Right.
So one thing, Tom. Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you're going down this path, and so I kind of wanted to sort of ask this. So I've been, as we were reading through this first section of and so it came to pass stuff, I'm like, you guys got a lot of what happened pretty close to what happened. You guys, how did you guys approach predicting the future? Was this you guys were worst case scenario, this is what happens? Or did you think that this was an accurate representation of what might happen in the next few decades?
Oh, I mean, we knew goals, right? We knew what we wanted the world to be by 2050. And then we just kind of built forward from there. Did we think that there was the likelihood of global pandemics? Yes. Write it in. Did we think that there was likelihood of global, internet failure? Maybe. Write it in because it served our purpose. It got us to where we wanted to be. But I don't think we were, we didn't have a secret copy of Nostradamus's unpublished volume under the desk, but we did rely on other people, right? I mean, I've said this before, the main book that we used to plan what happened in North America was a book called The 9 Nations of North America, which basically cut the nation up by using economics. Right? Just said these regions do these things. This is what they will do. They will band together because they do these things. And it worked for our purpose. So that's what we used.
It's interesting because it reminds me a little bit of that Google's on video that went around in the early zeros, where a lot of the things they predicted in that actually went to pass. But I was curious if you had that makes a lot of sense, because kind of if you looked at people who were predicting what they thought would happen, then there's a certain amount of futurism that was built into it then.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question as well. I know last time we spoke, you had mentioned some of the, going way back, some of the history behind Shadowrun was that you guys had written up a purely cyberpunk game.
Mm-hmm.
And then, TSR Games you learned that they were making cyberpunk.
Yep.
And Weissman was smartly so, in a fever dream, decided to throw magic into it.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny you say that. I'm going to cut you off and then let you talk. But it's funny you say that, because I said I was comparing second edition to first. There's an error in first edition that has apparently persisted and was never fixed, which is on page 7, where it says, "You might be a technomancer, sliding like a whisper through the databases of giant corporations." Oops.
That's awesome.
There it is.
Okay, someone tell the doctor he needs to stop spoiling things.
Well, so that brought me to my question was that, okay, so you had this game called Technomancer.
Yep.
Weissman panics, finds that this other game that's going to be cyberpunk is going to hit the market before yours does, decides to throw magic into it. How much of this history was written out before you guys decided to throw magic into it? Did you guys have a lot of this sort of, and so it came to pass ideas in terms of the fragmentation of governments and nations and stuff planned out, and sort of the crash of 29, all that kind of stuff? Was that already established before you added magic into the mix, or was the Native American nations and that whole thing something that spurred the idea to fragment everything and set that in motion?
There were broad strokes, right? We knew we wanted a dystopia. So we were figuring out, okay, well, what's the best way to do that and put mega corporations in charge? Well, if mega corporations are in charge, then something fundamentally happens to the government structure, right? They're only going to have so much authority unless you break governments. Because eventually governments are going to fight back, and governments have the power to pass laws, and there you go. This is this is the European Union threatening Twitter, right?
Right.
Do it the way we say, or you can't sell your product here. Period. And they have the authority to do that. So we knew we had to go somewhere there, but we didn't have a lot of the specifics. We were focusing a lot more, frankly, on dice mechanics and things like that initially. And we were right at the point where it was going to, it was all right, time to start putting it down on paper and start really fleshing it out. And let's go to Gen Con and, oh, hey, what's that game Mike Pondsmith is selling over there? Oh, shit. Oh, look at that.
So from your headspace as a writer, were you, I know it's probably hard to try to, these two things hadn't been mixed before, And so was it something that you leaned in from a fantasy perspective and then spun in cyberpunk? Or was it sort of the opposite? Or was it something you'd really tried to keep reminding yourself they were both the same thing? Or like, where was sort of the genesis of when you were writing this?
We knew we didn't want to create a game where magic was always there, because that would have been too much work to build a techno magic world forward from the year 0, right?
Right.
It wasn't conceivable. And you can see, other people have tried to do things like that. Ron Moore, who was the showrunner of the Battlestar Galactica revision, did a pilot called, I think it was called the 13th Precinct. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's floating out there on the internet. And the whole premise of that was that magic was the dominant technology, quote unquote. There was no technology per se. And the whole thing was a mystery, and somebody got killed, and it turned out the last shot of the pilot was revealing what the murder weapon was, and it was a revolver. And nobody had guns until then. The problem was the world building just didn't make any damn sense, because they had cars. They just had elementals driving propelling the cars. Well, why would you have cars?
Right.
Why?
Cars and guns work off the same principle. Thing goes bang to push other thing.
Yeah, it's like, what a car shape is a car shape because it required wheels. It came from wagons. You wouldn't, if you could just float, you'd have magic carpets with bubbles on them, that kind of a thing. And it was
why do you need internet if you can travel through the astral?
Yeah,
in
it just
seconds.
So we knew we weren't going there. And we thought it would be much more interesting if there was friction between not just the magic and technology rules, but the magic and technology and society. And we also knew that we didn't want to do the game when that started, right? So that it wasn't a game about the emergence of that. It was a game about society just about finding that balance and then moving forward from there. So we knew, all right, we have we have our modern world up through 1988, and then we're going to break it. And when these things start to happen, what organically would happen? We were sitting around one day, I don't remember who said it, but we did Native Americans would get a ton of power and kick everybody's ass. And we went, okay, that's different. And we can sell that. We can write that in the fiction, right? We had to artificially inflate populations of all the Native American tribes to a gross amount to do that. But, they got remarkably prolific in those 10 years or so, I guess. But that's kind of how it played out. And we kind of went forward from there. We know we want to get to here. How do we get to here? And then we just started writing stuff. and some of it stayed, some of it went, and it just got revised until we had a timeline, right? And that was the first thing we did, was just had a timeline. And then started writing the narrative around the timeline.
It helps make it so believable and how it all came to pass, really. It's like it's such a cascading, just a shit fest of events that happen that turn the world into what it becomes. And it's really cool to look through it and see like how would like the United States government topple? Well, all these things happened.
Right.
And the computer crash is sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's such a good, the timeline, you can tell it, the time you guys put into it, it sells the game.
Mm-hmm.
So with the like large emphasis on like Native Americans that I get the impression there was in like earlier editions, whereabouts did like, you know, the game start moving away from that? Because it seemed to be part of the lore, and then like I've never really seen anything like recent-ish based on it.
That's mostly because Catalyst dropped the ball hard enough it hit the floor, punched straight through. There is a bit of Native American metaplot in Catalyst Run. There's the Pueblos buy the Trans-Pecos from Aztlan and refuse to give it to their best buddies in the cast, which permanently damages relations between the two. There's the Sioux slowly going more and more Tarion Concordat and becoming more and more paranoid that the UCAS is going to invade them at any second.
And there's still quite a bit in this edition, honestly. Like you could look through the art and there's quite a bit of influences there. And
oh, sure,
one of the first images is a lot of like Mayan or Incan.
But it all, like for the most part, disappeared. Like, you know, I don't know if it's third or fourth, but like, you know, there's still a little bit of stuff like Aslan and like, you know, but for the most part,
yeah, I suspect it's differing priorities, right? Like the later editions, they had their objectives they were trying to accomplish, and that just didn't, you know, it wasn't part of what they were worried about, and so they just sort of they put it in the back seat and left it there.
Yeah, because fourth edition it did have a lot of stuff brought forward from third edition in a way that felt organic, but fifth edition, one of the main reasons why fifth edition is so metaplot light, aside from the CFD debacle, is because it was written with the expectation that you'd have all your fourth edition books on hand. So most of the metaplot is just left dangling from fourth edition up until the Neo-Anarchists Encyclopedia, which kicks off sixth edition, and through years and years of just no metaplot going on, the encyclopedia just says, oh, and by the way, Aztlan's still a shit show. The UCAS is about to invade the cast and fail hard. Ares is devolved into bugs. Remember that? No? Well, neither would we. Though they did bring back the horrors under the, you know, Walmart best value brand name of the Terrors.
Yes. So we haven't talked at all about Plusca change. I was curious, does anybody have it sounded like somebody wanted to talk about it in the chat from like earlier this week.
It's such a good story. I mean, I don't know who was mentioning it. Someone was a awesome overachiever and was like, I'm going to compare that to the first edition and the third edition intro stories. And I'm like, shit, I should probably do that then. Read the, oh, that was you?
No.
Nice work.
I was gonna say, as a minor thing, it's pronounced plus ça change.
Yeah, plus ça change, French.
Plus ça change.
I don't speak drunk Latin.
I feel like you said it like how Nameless would say it.
It's
in the story.
Yeah, it's basically like the C with the little thing hanging off is like an S sound.
French.
Is it French? Is that French? That
yes,
yeah,
that's
French. I can't do.
France.
Well, those 4 years.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, to the credit of, not that my opinion matters, to the credit of Paul, I'm like I said, I'm a really technical person. I love and how it came to pass because of it being like a very nonfiction. I don't know how to phrase that, in the sense that it's like, here's the here's the facts.
It feels factual.
And I don't, I'm a big nonfiction reader. It's hard for me to get into a lot of stuff. So as a major compliment to Paul's writing here, I got sucked into it. I know obviously we all love this stuff, but yeah, I think it, even being what I would call over the top a bit, is a big portion of, throwing slang around and getting that deep seated, making sure you get the point that, man, this is what you're seeing. It's an awesome mesh. I'm going to give the kind of broad strokes approach, but the artwork is awesome. It's, it makes sense that it isn't just, man, we're amazing, look at what's awesome about us. It's more like, fuck, we're gonna ran in, obviously I'm just kind of blabbering through it, but
there's a lot of drama in it.
I'm if anything, it's just I'm not a person who's into stories, unfortunately. As much as I like RPing and stuff, I don't have a draw to
it seems to highlight certain things about Shadowrun that makes it Shadowrun. Like, plans are made and plans don't always fall through. Like, sometimes things don't work out. You're just gonna have to improvise. And
men plan, God laughs.
Like, when playing
the fact that the Street Sam, he even basically says that this other Street Sam is like better than him, and it's a really cool storytelling technique to be like, oh shit, this guy knows he's in over his head a little bit here. It's a really tense story. And comparing it to the first edition one, I felt like that one sort of went through the motions of like, here's how these people talk, here's where they hang out, and here's a little glimpse of the job. Whereas I think one of the through lines of my reaction to this book is the economy of it, man. It's so efficient in how it gets the point across. And I feel like the picture on page 11 of like the nightclub basically does the work of the first 2 pages of that intro story to first edition. It just shows you this grimy nightclub where these people might hang out, where you might have a Shadowrunner hang out. But then when you read this story, there's all this double crossing in Plus de Change. There's like, this girl with this mysterious past. It almost, to me, it was like it showed much more dimension to what Shadowrun offers.
Well, and that's what the scene setting story is supposed to do in these books, right?
Yeah.
Is supposed to give you the taste. Because you don't know coming into it, and you can kind of say what it is in the the dry rule book, but it's a good way to set it. And I think Shadowrun First Edition was the first game that had a piece of fiction up front like that.
Interesting.
I think I'd have to go. I think I'm remembering, and I could be very wrong, so don't hold me to it. I think Cyberpunk had some stuff, but it didn't open.
Yeah, there weren't any outright short fiction. There were a couple supplements that were largely presented from an in-universe perspective, like Rocker Boy, Solo Fortune supplements and stuff like that. It wasn't until not Shadowrun, but a Cyberpunk 3.0 in 2005 that you actually had short stories interspersed in the rulebooks.
Mm-hmm.
There was some elements of Cyber Generation, but it's more of just here's how your character ended up as part of the Cyber Generation.
Right. What I remember is there were little snippets, but there wasn't a story. There were like scenes, if I remember correctly. And
yeah, especially in the back of the core book, which is a couple news reports that can be spun into mini adventures.
All right, I have to go now. So, Pink Fohawk, if you can PM me the link, that'd be great.
Will do, man.
Cheers.
Keep you posted.
I think one of the biggest portions of it is that I get the vibes of like underdog. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I really love that because I think the aspect that I have with tons of other systems and games is just the mentality that it's like, you're an adventurer, you're a badass, you're the best, you're going to grow into it. It's this false perception that it's like, no, you need to do something. And even this just starts with, I'm blind, and it's not because I'm like the biggest. Even he is a badass, but it's everything's fucked. But he's gonna make it. He's gonna, or that it's, you even feel like it's even chance, and that he's not below like Fohawk had said, like recognizing that guy's better than me, or I'm gonna die to this, so I'll give him a swift kick in the balls, because that I'm not below that.
I'm not going down without a fight.
Yeah. It's set a tone that I wasn't expecting.
It's got a very noir tone to it, where these people don't live glamorous lives, but you want to be them. They're so fucking cool. Even when they lose, they look cool.
Style over substance, Choom.
Mm-hmm. And that cyberpunk trope, the Decker that they're picking up is the Decker is like lives a life of privilege and luxury, and then realize the system is rotten, and she's got to get out. And that, like, basically she falls in with the people who are like living off the street and basically living a violent life. That's, that comes in so many cyberpunk stories. It's
look, it's Sam Werner.
Yeah. It's a good, like, basically it sets the tone for what Shadowrun has in it, and that there's magic, there's street violence, there's people rescuing kids in and over their head, and maybe rescuing them into a shittier place than they were when they started, but they're rescued.
And yeah, that even being a criminal doesn't mean you have to be evil.
Right.
The only rule of this world is that the strong eat the weak. You never were one for rules.
There is a very big sense of chivalry, sort of a Bushido and these guys, how they talk. Yeah, honor among thieves. But yeah, it's and I like the way that the action was written. It felt technical. I mean, I don't know anything about fighting, like martial arts or anything like that, but it just seemed cool. It has sort of that 80s action movie, Tom, you were talking about last time we spoke, where that was a lot of the influence and how you wanted this game to run, and it felt like that.
Well, and Paul Hume was one of those guys who did everything, right? In addition to being a practicing hermetic mage, I forget what belt he was, in what form of martial arts, and he was a programmer for General Electric, and it all shows in all the stuff that he did, that he had all these little bits of everything that he could draw from.
You mentioned he truly believed in magic.
Yes.
And practiced.
That is correct.
And you can see, you get that sense of, it's a cool, when magic's talked about in this story, it's this very mystical thing. Mm-hmm. And I really like that too. It doesn't, D&D, I felt like any other game I ever play Magic, it's this very demystified thing. It's this mechanical thing. You have this many spell slots, and this is exactly what the spell does. And what I really like about Shadowrun is it's very abstract in its magic.
To your point about D&D, that's because wizards and Dungeons and Dragons are just mundanes who have rules lawyered ritual magic to basically do what sorcerers do. It said we need to complete this ritual. It doesn't say we have to complete it at the same time.
Right.
So magicians are just rules. Wizards and Dungeons and Dragons are just rules lawyers. Whereas if you want a more mystical side of magic, you play a sorcerer.
Right. And I mean, I know like
Vancian graduates. Yeah.
And I've read a lot of the sort of like Jack Vance, source material on like how they derived spell slots, for instance, or whatever, how you can prepare so many spells.
Yep.
So I get that. And it's a cool way. It's not saying that's not cool or what's better or whatever. It's just, to me, I like the fact that magic is still this very new and scary thing in the world of Shadowrun to most people.
And the people who actually know how it works ain't talking to us, little folk.
Right. And even the section, and I think it's So It Came to Pass, or where they start talking about how, universities start trying to study matter, trying to make it into more of a science. They're somewhat successful in that, but it's still something that can't be fully quantified,
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool.
It's getting ahead of our reading here a bit, but like that is a thing that I think really clicked really works in the Shadowrun rule set, is that like basically magic is really abstract, and yet the rules are strong enough that they can constrain it to a playable form.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I've played like the old mage game that not Wizards of the Coast, White Wolf used to make. The old mage game where basically the magic is you can do anything as long as you can convince the game master that it should be possible. And magic is really mystical in that sense, but also it's a huge pain in the butt for people to sort of wrap their head around. Whereas the Shadowrun magic system does a really good job of being like, this is all generally, you can do basically anything if you can figure out a way of working it into your spell. So like Mana Bolt, for example. Mana Bolt can look like anything, and two mages can cast Mana Bolt. It looks completely different, but it has that same basic structure of how it works. And
yeah, it doesn't matter one. Oh, sorry. Because in Shadowrun, one person channels the power of their ancestors' spirits, and the other person thinks he scienced it all out, but it's still hot bit of fire goes towards bad guy.
Right. And like this is something I do when I'm running the game also, and it's a little bit tricky for players, is I say, okay, so your spell can look like whatever you want it to look like. It's your spell. Just make sure that it does this. And as long as it does this, it looks like whatever you want it to look like. And it
doesn't gain any special advantages,
right?
Because of how you have it look.
Right. But you can make it yours in a way, and that has always felt like a really huge, like no other game has really tapped into that as a way to handling that as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, it gels holistically with the rest of, like we were talking about, with the rest of the approach to the game, where it's like it spurs creativity in your players, right? And how they want to make this game theirs, as opposed to like squaring up in combat and making things very rigid. It's very, I don't know, there's a much more creative aspect to, I think, in Shadowrun. It makes you have to start thinking creatively and thinking what you would do in that situation.
A lot of ways it was ahead of its time, because a lot of newer games today are starting to use these techniques. And Tom, you were talking about like how people resisted it when it was, when the game was new. And I feel like if it had hit today, people have been like, yeah, that makes sense. Well, of course we're gonna be flexible here.
That's a really good point. It's like if you see that change in later editions of Shadowrun, where you see the possible frustration of players going, well, I need this spelled out. Like, how exactly does this work in this situation? And what about in this situation? And then that's where you start getting that rules bloat that people talk about now. And I think that's sort of one of the reasons I created our podcast. And I think why I was really excited to talk about second edition now too. I just feel like there's not a lot of awareness that like second edition, it's not as cumbersome as a lot of people think it is. It's got a lot going for it in terms of, it's a pretty lean and, like I said, a very efficient rule book. And yeah, like it's got a lot of abstract rules, which I think is kind of in right now with people. People do like to make these things work for them, how they like to play. And I think Shadowrun allows that.
It was God bless him, but it was a fight with Paul at times because he wanted to keep it vague and, undefined. And we're like, yeah, but we need a rule there, Paul. we need something.
It's not story time.
Yeah.
And leave it up to the GM, because sometimes GMs just aren't that creative. So,
but you just, we need to, you can play around as much as you want, but we need to understand where the walls are. So let's define the walls, and then we're okay from there. We can just move on and let the game master figure it out for their group. But as somebody pointed out earlier, there's some game masters out there that don't want to figure it out. But I think more importantly, there are groups of players that don't trust the game master when they figure it out. They want to see it in the rule book that says,
Yeah.
rule as written says this, so I can do that.
I think a big portion of that too isn't always necessarily that not is distrust, but I think there's lots of tables, certainly now with current players, that it's an expectation. It's like, what, as a player and player decision, I like having enough rules to get an idea of success or an idea of how likely my idea is to work. And yeah, that is the major fault to lots of those. I think that's the example I give all the time when discussing different systems with people is that's great and all, but that it says something with every game's different with different DMs. Yeah, but if I'm playing a game and I want to do what I want my character to be able to do, the dice determine that, and the DM's making a story with me, but we got to be on the same page.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, if combat is deadly, and going in that you cannot just run straight into combat, you're right. It's like you kind of need to know a good idea of how things are going to work mechanically that can give you that advantage you're looking for, as opposed to just being creative, I guess, and hoping that things go in your favor, or the DM grants you certain advantages based on what you thought to do. It's like you can kind of stack things in your favor when you have the walls firmly established in the rules. Speaking of, I was talking about and so it came to pass, and you were talking about the timeline and how you guys that's sort of what you worked from. I noticed how you guys sort of made a lot of, Seattle's not really mentioned in the beginning at all. And I really liked that you took this very broad approach at first. And it seems like each one of these bullet points in your timeline happens somewhere else to kind of build that world out. I really liked that. I've mentioned, New York and then the Euro Wars, and it really starts to paint this whole picture of how the world went to shit.
And really nowadays you just switch Russia and Poland with Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. And beat us with COVID and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Very prophetic.
I'm still waiting for my transformation to a metahuman type. So,
well,
that was promised to me like 2 years ago, and still hasn't happened.
I'm looking forward to a high quality cyber eye with automatic step down flare compensation and integrated targeting scope.
That's what I was waiting for, is my multi-optic guy. So it's all good. That and my jetpack and flying car.
There you go.
Got my bionic pancreas. You guys are just behind.
Yeah, you are. You are cybered with your
Sam.
diabetic pump.
I'm a Sam. That's right.
Can I just get and I need a new back. That would be great too. That would help.
I know one of my other big notes, and again, is just like me being absolutely imperceptive. I love the descriptions of metahumanity, but it was legitimately kind of depressing, where I sat down, I was like, let's dig into this. And I really do love Nelson's art. And it didn't occur to me until I was reading this portion that I was like, oh damn, all the arts depicting the characters that were just shown previously, like page 39, is of the characters I just looked at. That's how imperceptive I am. It was such an open.
It brought them all together.
I love how I've got such a new appreciation. Such a new appreciation for the art I've already known I love. And then it was like, man, how is it I've never noticed this before?
That's why we're doing this. There's all kinds of stuff to miss.
Exactly.
It's funny, looking at that picture, I now have a recollection of looking at that picture and saying to Jim, what's that Frisbee thing in the bottom? And him saying, I don't know. It's a flying thing.
It's a Roomba.
Yeah.
You strike a hard bargain. Okay, deal.
But a lot of things came into existence. Don't ask me to point out any particular ones right now, because an artist drew a cool thing, right? And went, I don't know what that is, but I'll make it something.
Right.
You know?
Did they get direction in terms of specifically what you wanted them to draw in a lot of instances? Like, for instance, do you remember? I mean, this is thinking way back, but like the picture on page 25, right? That's an orc. I'm guessing it's an orc, but it's terrifying, and it's put right in the place where, you know, it's talking about goblinization and how that was terrifying for people. It's like the perfect image to punctuate what people were experiencing when they saw this happening.
Yep. And
was that just someone's cool, weird, gruesome depiction?
It looks like Tetsuo from Akira a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it was meant to be a goblinization that didn't work out.
That's so cool.
Right? Of somebody who changed and
Didn't quite all the way change.
the body didn't make it.
Yikes.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's like the monster in Galaxy Quest after the teleports goes wrong and it's inside out before it explodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so I looked at that. That was a piece of art that got me. And then also just like this hard ass Decker in the next page.
I was just
There's
gonna
no
comment on
rules,
that.
doesn't follow the rules, the crazy ghost protocol.
Attack and the world attacks with you.
Echo Mirage guy. That's so awesome.
I really appreciated that picture because, as we all know, us IT individuals are ripped.
Yeah, it's true. Media gets it all wrong. They have for
I
this whole
think
time.
You got large-breasted secretary behind you,
I think
too.
he's emaciated. I don't think he's ripped. I think he's emaciated.
Right.
Brother in Christ, his arms are nearly twice the size of mine.
Right.
Plexus.
And that shirt was just in the dryer a little too long. It's not a sweet belly shirt for this ripped dude. It's just his mom. He's lived in his basement. His mom did the laundry wrong.
Yep.
You know, that
That's
feels
so
a
cool.
little bit. That one feels a little bit like the effects of the '80s being right behind that art. That T-shirt feels like the kind of T-shirt that would have ended up on somebody in 1988.
Yeah,
That's awesome. It's so awesome.
I mean, honestly, it just looks like a screen. Someone took a photo of me earlier with an error appearing, and you put a jack in my head. I don't know what to tell you. That's me saying "fuck."
Yeah, he's getting some biofeedback, man. I had another question about, and I'm sure this was intentionally vague, but the Confederated American States.
yeah.
There's a mention there about how they seceded from the UCAS, and there's not a lot of information as to why. And I'm sure there's a source book. I don't own it, and I'm going to have to as soon as you tell me what it is. In terms of what their motivation for seceding was,
As the lore master on one of the old LCs, the crash wiped out the South's largely tech-based economy, and the president just did not provide federal recovery aid. He just said, "Ha ha, get fucked, rednecks. I'm going to go annex Canada now." And so they basically told him to pound sand. And,
is this correct, Tom?
Sounds about right.
And a lot of the companies the president did pour aid into would later go on to become mega corporations who would prop up the UCAS's economy. So one of the funny things I mentioned in the lore channel of the old LC is that the CAS is essentially Luigi wins by doing absolutely nothing. Like, they are dirt poor compared to the UCAS, but the corporations don't control them as much. Like, one of the big plot points in one of the few good plot points of 6th edition is that the UCAS's economy has started to stall as it's very top heavy. So the UCAS wants to essentially Anschluss the CAS and run off of the CAS's much healthier economy.
Huh.
And also the CAS has much more agricultural base, so more people eat real food than the Yankees who subsist off of krill and mycoprotein.
Is there a book we can like dig into lore for this? This is all very interesting.
Shadows of North America.
Neo-Anarchist Guide to North
The
America
third.
was the first edition book that had it. It sounds like the later books went into a little bit more detail because I've got it up in front of me. And all it says is basically led by senators from Alabama and Georgia, a major walkout of legislators from the Southern Bloc threatens to derail the merging of the United States and Canada. Senate argues over new tax structures and fund allocation, which is probably just very shorthand for what you just described. And then they vote to secede within 2 years.
And yeah, because like I know the third edition Calfrey sourcebook also goes into how Calfrey became a thing, where after the secession of the caste, Calfrey started raising merry hell in the Senate, demanding major concessions to the massive exclave, until the president, who entirely pissed off at the existence of the caste and just fed up with the Californians' shenanigans, the Californians held a bluff referendum to secede. They didn't expect it to, actually pass. It passed. They weren't going to do anything about it because they never expected to get that far. But the president, who, still bitter about the caste and once again, having had way too much of the Californians shit, just said, all right, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Sounds like Brexit.
Every time you say Californians, I think of the SNL sketch, just FYI, but just so you know.
Well, look, just
by 5th edition and 6th edition, Calfrey only really exists on paper. And Sacramento has started to collaborate with the Shadim.
Is there, I know a lot of people play the CAS as in sort of intolerant to Awakened, or, they give sort of a more racist, mindset to the Confederates, if you will. Is that also sort of canon? Like, is that
sort of in the
regional and naming similarities? Is that there for a reason?
I would hope not, but I can't make any promises about what we did 25 years ago.
Well, actually, it's mentioned that it actually used to be pretty bad, but embargoes from the NAN forced the caste the caste actually gave metahumans full rights of, I think it's about 2 or 3 years before the UCAS did. And
right.
Humanus is nowhere near as welcome as they are in the UCAS, because Humanus assassinated a very popular caste president, which caused everyone to turn on them.
Well, that's some good news.
Yeah, I actually used to troll the hell out of an IRL Californian on the old LC, who, ironically enough, honestly, for being a Californian, she sounded a lot like an Azatlani hardcore nationalist.
Well, you never know where they're gonna show up from.
And I couldn't help but notice you snuck the Universal Brotherhood in there in the very last paragraph.
Yes, in fact, I've been comparing, right? First edition, second edition, what did I change? And it's like, in that whole chapter, there's a little bit of tweaking, right? Some of it for clarity, some of it to reflect things we'd later decided. But literally, the major difference is like 3 sentences. We take it to 2053, but I didn't really fill in anything between 2050 and 2053. There is just that, in the same period, the humanitarian organization, the Universal Brotherhood, enjoyed international growth. That's about it. And some dates on when the UCAS and CAS presidents were elected. That's about it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's perfect.
Did you have a sense that like you were already going to do something big with the Universal Brotherhood at that point? Because I think was the adventure already out?
Yes, it was. Universal Brotherhood was a first edition.
Okay.
So that was out. We knew that we were going in that direction, and the original Harlequin was out.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I thought that was second edition, the Universal Brotherhood. Interesting.
I know it was virtually impossible to find by the time I got in the game because everybody talked about it and I could not find a copy.
It was 1990. So yeah, it was before. It would have been in basically in the first year.
Yeah. It was 80.
Harlequin. You know he's on the good side, but that doesn't stop him from being a dick.
You know it.
An eternal dick.
And the good side, that line moves. That line moves.
That's it.
He's on the, anti-horrific abominations from beyond the veil side, so that's close enough.
The side you want him on.
Sure.
That's so interesting. I really thought the Universal Brotherhood was second edition, but that's cool to know. I feel like that's where the promise of things can get real weird in Shadowrun.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it starts to get the wonderfully weird vibes. You start reading stuff like that.
Well, I've got it open, and Sam Lewis was the developer on it, which means it was being worked on very early after I got there, because there was just too much going on. So we split some early development assignments. So he got Nigel to write the main and got Chris Kobasic to write the story. And the concept is Jordan, myself, and Sam. So we talked it through, and then Sam ran with it.
That's awesome.
But that was a case
remember
where we talked it through, told Nigel, you're going in this direction, and he just killed it.
You're telling us that you guys were doing so much at once, like at such a short amount of time. It was like you had it all planned and just sort of splintered it to let it go and get done all at about the same time.
Well, I was starting... I was having to develop stuff, and I was still writing the Street Samurai catalog. So yeah, everything was hitting.
That's a lot.
Because I'd been contracted to do Street Samurai before I got hired to work on the game. So it still needed to get done. That's how these things work. But that's interesting. But Street Samurai didn't... It's all coming to blending together in my head. When did that?
When did Street Samurai release? Was it just after second edition?
Well, there was a first edition and a second edition.
Yeah.
Guys for Shadowrun too, yeah.
Yeah, it originally came out for first edition, and then I revised it for second edition.
Okay.
And it looks like the first edition came out probably the same year as Shadowrun Core.
I'm gonna guess. Yeah, it looks like it says 1989 and then 1993 for the second one.
Yeah.
So the second one came a year after the second edition.
Shortly after second edition.
Yeah. I remember scrolling through this as one of my favorite books was the Street Samurai catalog.
I'm not familiar with the first edition. Did much change? Was it? I know that obviously the damage codes and everything had to change, but
no, there wasn't much.
Yeah,
Or a couple of pages that got blanked out as listed as banned in second edition.
Yeah,
Redacted.
Yeah, that's the stuff that got folded into the base of Shadowrun second edition, because the stuff that's redacted in the second edition version is stuff such as the Ares firepower ammunition, which changes the Predator's damage code to what it is stock in second edition, and the new magazines that gives the Predator a 15-round capacity rather than a 10-round.
I love the redacted, though. It just piques curiosity.
Yeah.
It peaks. We don't have time to write new content.
I want that gun. Where'd that go?
I'm seeing
I already have it.
I'm seeing it here. It's just giant banned, purged black text.
Yeah, there's
Dude,
just
that
like
is
it's
awesome.
blocked over.
Yeah.
So salacious.
That was the first way that I encountered the Street Samurai catalog. I was like, oh shit, they had cool stuff in first edition.
That's awesome. Game-breaking weapons
Yeah.
that you didn't know you had in the core. Now
That was kind of what I assumed, was that it was just OP in first edition, and they just sort of took it out because they're like, we can't give this to second edition players. It'll ruin the game.
Well, giving them twice would be pretty powerful.
Yep. Yep.
So my favorite bit about second edition is the Fields of Fire alternative caseless rules.
Yeah.
Because it means that caseless actually has something other than flavor. It carries 20% more ammunition. It's much lighter. The gun's more expensive, though. Because, like, a caseless Predator carries 18 rounds of 10mm Magnum, which is just delicious.
Yeah, I hope you have troll hands for that, by the way.
I know. I actually found a real-life 10mm Magnum pistol. Actually, let me find the picture. It's essentially a double-stack auto mag is what the Predator is.
That's awesome.
It
So,
helped.
Yeah, Fields of Fire was definitely the escalation handbook.
I need to get that. That's one of the ones I've been wanting to get a hold of. So, and now the bundle of holding has all of them.
So
Yep.
that,
Yeah,
Most of them, not all of them. Some of the stuff is
Not all of them,
none of
Yeah.
the adventure.
but still very exciting that this core rulebook's in PDF form now. They might be able to sell that print on demand soon. That'd be great.
Yeah.
That's irked me for so long that it wasn't being sold print on demand, but every other edition was.
Third edition isn't yet either, but
Third isn't?
no, it isn't.
Oh, I didn't know.
First is print on demand, and second and third are not. Well, second doesn't exist, and third is not print on demand.
Oh, interesting.
and they don't
I would
actually
like
have they don't actually sell a PDF of Threats 2. They sell Threats 1 for second edition, but not Threats 2 for third, which I find weird.
Yeah, my second edition rule books are getting a little not doing so great these days. So I would love to have a more recently printed copy or a couple to.
Yep.
As a game master, basically, I have 3 copies of the game, and I share the books with people at the table because that's usually what happens. Especially with second edition, because you're like, okay, well, there's a PDF out there somewhere, but ultimately, you're gonna have to look at my books if you want to know what's going on.
Yeah. And it just feels it's because I think it's laid out really well. I know that's not a popular opinion sometimes from people. They think that older editions aren't laid out great. I think they are. This one is, and it's like I from like thumb feel, I can know kind of where to open this thing up. It's not so unwieldy. Third edition's really thick, so it's like harder to do that.
We did score a ways back a hard copy or a hardbound copy of second edition on eBay, which I was very happy with because it was in really good shape, and my old second edition hardcover was I highlighted it and put post-its between pages, and it did not survive very well.
Yeah.
I think third edition is only 30 pages longer than second.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But it may have a slightly thicker paper.
Mm-hmm.
Feels heavier. Feels bigger.
Because the second edition I'm looking at, I can see through the pages. And third is a little bit better.
Maybe that's it.
Which would make sense if they were doing so much grayscale work.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
Because it would make it really hard to read a 2-sided page if you could see right through the page with all that grayscale. Yeah.
Also, I love Shadowrun's like Fields of Fire. Like Shadowrun guns have reasonable magazine sizes. Like I hate Cyberpunk because why would the U.S. military choose a 9mm pistol with a 10-round capacity when they have a 16-round that they're getting rid of?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like I could walk literally 2 miles down the road, so they're closer to 4, and pick up a 10mm that is just straight up better than anything the dark future has to offer.
That's why it's the dark future.
I will say, and I don't know if anyone's
I realized back
firearm
then
fans.
it was kind of new in the 80s.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's a big firearms fan, but I always loved the art and description of lots of the firearms in the game. But they always gave me the impression they were Berettas. I mean, I just posted a picture too of like an 87 target that always reminded me of the Predator. And my business partner had an old cheetah, nice cheetah that I look at. I even think I sent that to you, Fohawk, a long while ago. My business partner having that, and I was like, pretty sure I found Pretty sure I found a predator.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it was, the artists were going off of existing
Right.
designs, right? It's kind of like, you look at Star Wars, and if you look really close, you can figure out what all those guns were initially.
Yeah.
Predator was like RoboCop's gun. That was the thing that I loved about it. It looked just like RoboCop's gun.
That's exactly what it was.
That's awesome. I think of Blade nowadays because that's the pistol I've always looked at. Like, it looks so cool, and they're definitely ripping off of RoboCop and therefore Shadowrun. I choose to believe that they love Shadowrun.
So Paul Hume and Bob Charette did a bunch of games before Shadowrun. One of them was called Aftermath, and it was a post-apocalyptic role-playing game, and it was gun authentic to an nth degree. They actually had formulas so that to calculate damage and range off the grain of the bullets.
Damn.
I gotta get this.
They were crazy.
There's your rules bloat.
So one of our very first decisions was we ain't doing that.
Right.
Guns have numbers, and
Yes.
they're not that You from each other. Pistols are all really similar, and because in Aftermath you would always play the optimization game, right? It was all, if I have this barrel and this size and this grain and this and that, it's like, no, it's not what this game is. That's
Pistol go bang, bad guy go flop.
Yep.
Well, I love that. That's one of the
heavy pistol go banger. That.
Oh, that's one of the things I love about one of the changes you made with the damage staging. It's like, it's such an elegant change, that and the initiative. I mean, we talked about this sort of a little bit last time, but it's like, you do lose some of, I guess, the characterization of all the different firearms and how they stage differently. But my God, that saves you so much more time in a firefight. Just knowing every 2 successes is what stages damage up and down.
Yep.
It plays to, like you were talking about, the speed of like an 80s action movie firefight, as opposed to getting more simulationist with it.
Well, and also what we determined, people would forget. They'd be playing and they'd be like, oh crap, no, that's a staging 4. Wait, hang on, It's like, all right. So what happens if we make it just a staging of 2 for everybody? What happens? It doesn't change a hell of a lot.
So I'm still sad that 2nd edition made light pistols only do scratch damage.
Yeah.
well, the fact that the 2, that it carried through all the systems too, not just firearms, but magic successes, and it just felt like it was this one change that really tied the room together. It
really tied the room together.
Yeah. You just always have to remember, it's like, it's just one of those nice, easy to remember numbers that you know.
Right. And it was just the ultimate natural evolution of, initially the game systems for all the different parts were very different.
Right.
I know some of the first passes of the magic system were very different. And we're like, yeah, it needs to be 70% of everything else, right? Because otherwise you're running an entirely different rule set. And, Paul, and I get it, wanted it to feel different. But ultimately you have to say, yeah, but we're a game and they're sitting around a table and people gotta, get on with their lives.
I was waiting for Paul to come back up.
Yeah.
When it comes to the magic and the like hermetics versus shamans, was that something that he had a lot of pull in?
Oh, totally. That was he wrote all that stuff.
That's so cool. Sorry, Bejeweled, I cut you off, man. What were you going to say?
Yeah, from what I was hearing about the other game with the grain, the barrel length, that sounds a lot like Phoenix Command with its 20 pages of hit locations.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I grazed the 15 minutes later, scapula. All right, where's the other 50 bullets?
Yep.
Well, when you read the intro to Cyberpunk, even, they tout pretty heavily that they worked with this guy that was part of SWAT, the LA SWAT team, and they've derived this firefight system that's supposed to be simulating real firefighting. And I just like the direction you guys chose. I mean, that some people really love that, and that's cool too. But I like the hard boiled, action movie, John Woo,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the thing about Cyberpunk is that it actually, on low levels, it's very realistic. It's half-trained people blazing away with pistols, each one terrified that a graze will end their entire life. Once you've got some augmentations, you're dual-wielding submachine guns with stutter chips so that they skip over non-targets, and it's just, you basically just twirl like a ballerina and all the enemies die.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I love that it's, there is a very tactical approach in this as well. There's plenty of meat there if you're trying to play a more tactical game. It's all there. But it's also, I think like we were talking about how it can be more abstract. I think that this allows for it. Like, I got like sort of the action movie rules in my game. I don't really worry about reloading, that's a faux pas with a lot of people, but for me, that works. And there's still plenty of rules there without really slowing it down if I choose to do that. Whereas I feel like if I'm playing Cyberpunk and I'm not making them reload, it's sort of like, why would you do that? The rest of it's so built around being similar to a real firefight that it kind of would feel weird. Whereas this one, it is like an action movie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's that 80s, Chuck Norris, Delta Force, whatever, reloads.
Lethal Weapon.
Right? That's all part.
Lethal Weapon, yeah. Die Hard.
Right.
Don't reload till it looks cool.
Only when dramatically appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Predator was too realistic for me, guys. When they have the 50 cal machine gun and it runs out of bullets, like, get out of here.
The best part about Predator is that in the first bit where it's deliberately a cheesy, generic action movie, they don't have to reload. Once the Predator shows up and it genre shifts, suddenly they have to count every bullet.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Then it becomes survival horror.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I wanted to point out. I mean, that's so interesting. That's one of the big the hermetic mages versus shaman. The fact that you were talking about Noish and Bejeweled, how spells can be personalized, but they have the same effects. And it's like there's game mechanics here that kind of help drive that with shaman too, where you get extra dice if you're this kind of shaman and you're doing this type of thing. Versus, I just thought that was, I think a lot of people gravitate toward that as well with Shadowrun, where magic feels visceral, it feels different, and it feels like there's ways to personalize it within the magic system as well.
In second edition also, I know it flattens out in later editions, but second, third edition, like the conjuring difference between a shaman and a hermetic mage, it's huge. Like from just the spirits are the spirits. They all function fundamentally the same. But the way that a shaman has to call up a spirit versus the way a hermetic mage has to call up a spirit, it's so the flavor is completely different. Mm-hmm. The dynamics and the considerations of a shaman being like, oh yeah, I can whip up a spirit and we can chase this thing down. Whereas a hermetic mage is like, no, I got something on call, but if I need another one, we're gonna take downtime while I get the other spirit set up. And
whereas you have Catalyst Run where every mage plays exactly the same.
Right, and I think that dynamic of having different approaches to just doing magic, it adds a lot to the game. I think it makes the game more complicated in a flavor way versus, like, statistically it's the same thing, but from a perspective of like how the game feels, it changes it a lot.
Sorry, I'm flipping through pages while you guys are talking.
I am as well.
Yeah, and I gotta say, whoever wrote Closa Challenge, I love it. It feels like something I'd read in Burning Chrome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was Paul Hume.
Paul Hume.
Yep. And he got tapped to do that because so much else was going on. You know, that we said we wanted, you know, we needed somebody who could work in parallel. And he was, you know, he'd done other stuff and he was writing some fiction, wanted to do some more. So we said, okay, write the setting story, because we knew that we were pulling A Night on the Town. Give us something that does the same thing but reflects 3 years later understanding what the game was.
Did a great job.
Because that was the thing, right? Bob Charette wrote The Secrets of Power, started writing the Secrets of Power stuff before the game was out. So we had that A Night on the Town, which was coming from those books. But it was kind of taking a guess at how it was all going to fall together. You know, and that's why in some of those early books, there's some things that are in there that never get referenced again. And some things don't work exactly like they do in the rules. But that's because it was all kind of coming together at the same time.
You see something similar with the other roughly same era of Dark Conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
The game is a lot more horror, but because the novels were written at the same time as the game was being developed, they came out as the novels are actually a good deal more cyberpunk than the RPG they're based on.
Right. Yep.
Well, and Tom, you'd mentioned that like you guys were purposefully trying to, you know, leave things open-ended in terms of what the tone of this game was supposed to be. If someone wanted to play it a little more cloak and dagger sort of noir mystique, they could, but you didn't want to like drive them to think that that's what this game only is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, I felt like the story did a good job of painting all of those different, you know, those different sort of dimensions to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of that intrigue. There's a little bit of that. There's like a kung fu action scene that's badass. And then ultimately sort of this, we're going to get this kid out and we're going to screw the man. And it all boils back down to like this true cyberpunk feel. It's great.
Right.
And going back to the magic too, like Noise, you're talking about how it feels so different. It's like, you really feel that you get the feeling that somebody writing this game really believed in magic.
Yeah.
Like it really feels grounded. Like there's it could be real.
So I have a spell book kicking around in my library about druid magic, which I picked up maybe a couple of years ago. And I was really impressed with how similar it landed to like the Shadowrun rules about how magic works. And so hearing that Paul Hume believed in magic, and he's the guy who was kind of involved in the magic definition, is like, oh, so that was probably near his template. It was actually the community that believes in real magic in the real world. That's how he built it. That's very interesting.
Got that hint of craziness in there.
I know how to cast a circle of protection, so I can,
you're all set.
I can get much further than that.
So was that something when he was, when he brought to you guys, like, well, okay, maybe there's this shaman and they work differently than hermetics. What was that? What was that give and take like? You said, it sounds like you guys were sort of the ones that would help rein him in terms of ruling. Did you guys find a way to make that work mechanically? Is that how that relationship worked?
We just, we talked through a lot of it. It was just, if this does this, then this has to do this. And, how do you play that was always the question, right? It's like, we understand what the concept is, but how do you play it? How does it operationalize? When you're at the table and you have a character sheet and you have some dice, what are you doing? What are the decisions that the player's making? And how are they different from the decisions the Hermetic Mage is making, or the Street Samurai is making, or the whoever is making? And that was really how it came down, right? What do you do? How do you do it? How do we write that down? How do we explain that to people?
It's really well done.
We assign numbers to that thing you want to do.
Yeah, because they have to be able to say, I do this and this is how I do it. Okay, great. You know, and there are fundamental differences, but there's a lot of similarities between the two systems. In terms of systems, how you get there is different.
Did you have? You were mentioning like when this was called Technomancer, you had been mostly worrying about how the dice worked. I'm assuming that a lot of this stuff was in there as well, already sort of thought out in terms of, how the dice mechanics work. So the magic system, you sort of spun off of a system you'd already were creating. That's pretty crazy. I mean, that's pretty amazing that it can feel like a different game, but it still feels like the original game as well.
So here's a bit of trivia that most people probably don't know. The game system was originally built around D10s.
Ooh.
Ah, I can see why that changed.
And it changed. Well, why do you think it changed?
Vampire.
I've got about 100 D10s laying around.
Vampire came afterward.
Okay.
Availability of dice is my main guess.
What was that?
Availability of dice. People are more likely to have D6s lying around.
You could buy D6s in the pharmacy.
Yeah.
There was this weird belief among certain people that people were going to just show up who had never played role-playing games and buy Shadowrun and play it. So we needed to make it dice that they had access to.
The confidence.
The crazy.
No, I had quite a few.
The craziness. I love it.
Well, if they've got a copy of Risk, they're all set. Okay.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that person who bought Shadowrun and is like, you know what? I think I have like a ton of these in my Risk box. So,
well, and if you go to first edition, there isn't even a section that says, "Hey, this is a role-playing game, and this is how that works."
I was just going to point out that I love that that's in this book. It does come from that perspective that like it is a very it's a very optimistic approach that like we're going to get some people that never played role-playing games. We're going to then they're going to learn on Shadowrun.
Yeah.
I love that.
What were we smoking? Yeah.
But I think it helps like in terms, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I think there's a lot of people that came from D&D and Shadowrun's very different. And a lot of those we've already mentioned, but also mechanically very, very, very different. And I really appreciate being able to, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot, self-proclaimed idiot. It takes me a long time to learn things. I have to reread pages over and over and over. This 40 pages we had to do, it took me forever. I'm glad I gave us a month. But I really appreciate that it kind of goes all the way back and it kind of puts the training wheels back on and it's sort of like starts you where I'm like, oh yeah, well, obviously, that way. And then like within 2 pages, I'm like, okay, I got to start paying attention. It's I got to focus here. They're getting into some tough stuff. It's welcome. Like the fact that it comes from that approach.
Well, and that's why the whole game concepts chapter changed, right? It was, if you compare first and second edition, it's all front loaded, right? I mean, I'm talking about opposed tests and this and that and blah. And it's like, it's just so much, those couple of pages. And what we realized for second edition was, explain the basic concepts. And then when you get to those sections of the rules, explain them again. As opposed to just saying, yeah, you read about this already, so now we're going to apply it.
Yeah.
It really works. Yeah, you gloss, you kind of just touch on sort of what the main pillars of what this game runs on and just keep moving. It's great.
But yeah, it was also you just, because it's like, here's success tests, and then resistance tests, and then resisted/unresisted tests, and then opposed success tests, and then dice pools. It's like, oh my god, why are people playing this game?
It's true, especially when it comes to, most of, we talked about, it's like combat's not the end all be all. And so most of what you're doing is just skill tests or attribute tests. Mm-hmm. And those are fairly simple. Like you basically reading those first 6 pages or whatever, 11 pages there, all you need to know to do skill and attribute tests, which is pretty cool. Like, you already know sort of how the game runs at a very basic level. And then you got to keep looking, obviously, to figure out how combat works. It's obviously more involved in Magic as well, but you go into that short story feeling like I kind of get how this works, even though you don't.
Yep.
You're not even close, but you feel like you are.
One of those things, you can read all you want, and then you start playing, and then it's like, oh, okay, this is what he means. But
that's what that meant, right? Okay.
Right. But you give them a win at the beginning. You let them feel like they got it. Like, okay, this is simple enough, right? And then they're going to keep going. They're not going to feel overwhelmed in the beginning.
Well, and a new player probably be like, well, we'll figure this out later. Right now, we'll just roll a couple of dice, make it happen. That's how I learned role-playing games. There's when we encountered a situation where we didn't know what was going on, we go, well, obviously we have some homework before next time we play, but we're going to roll the dice and move on.
Okay, well then let's see. What's the closest skill that would work with that? Give me one of those rolls, and then okay, sure, it happens. It's like,
right. I coming from like I'm a lifelong Shadowrun fan, but I didn't come to the TTRPG until much later on, and there were already sort of these established edition wars going on. Like if you go to the Shadowrun subreddit or whatever, and
a wretched high, villainy. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the wretched. It's not always so bad, but it can get there. And it's like, people have these notions of what Shadowrun is or what it should be. And there's kind of as a newcomer, you kind of look at it and you go, oh man, like these guys are so rigid on what Shadowrun is. I got to be perfect. If I got to learn, why even, there's almost this feeling that like, why even learn Shadowrun if you don't, what's the saying? It's like, in order to learn Shadowrun, you must first be an expert at Shadowrun. And it was sort of like this mentality. I felt like, well, I'm not going to be smart enough, or I'm not going to be able to remember all this stuff. So maybe I should just port this to another system or whatever. That was sort of always what I felt when I'd come in there and start asking about Shadowrun. And so I think that's one of the major things I appreciate about second edition is it comes from this very arms wide open approach of like, no, come in here. You can learn this, here's what a role-playing game is at the very beginning, and it feels more welcoming and less inside.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we were talking about this the other night in chat. I feel like by today's standards, Shadowrun's a pretty straightforward game. One of the reasons it has a reputation for being so hard is because it was one of the handful of other games, in the early 90s, you're like, you have D&D and then there's everything else, and everything else is hard because it's not D&D. Right. And so, but today in quote unquote the modern gaming landscape, I guess, Shadowrun is not harder than Fate. It's not harder than Fiasco. It's not harder than Blades in the Dark. Actually, pretty similar to Blades in the Dark in a lot of ways. And people are learning those games right and left. Powered by Apocalypse. That's being used for all sorts of stuff. So like it has a reputation for being hard. But and I think you mentioned this like in the early parts of your podcast, you're like, it's not as challenging as you might think it is. And it's got this reputation for being really opaque and really difficult. And if you sit down and look at at least with the second edition rules we're looking at here, you're like, actually, this is pretty damn straightforward. All things considered.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, it's like you get in there before that whole trend of mid to late 90s crunch, where it's like, what elaborate on that rule. Tell me exactly what happens in this situation. And then you have all these a ton of tables and all this rules bloat. And I feel like that's where the stigma came from. But it's just like, if you go back before that.
Right. Well,
one word, roll master.
Yeah.
I have played a game. I have a friend who, I don't know if anybody else here has played Harn World or Harn, but they have rules in that game for getting sepsis as a result of getting stabbed in combat. And I have a friend who really, really, really wanted to play it. It was brutally slow game because you're like, okay, so you've been injured. Now we have to check to see if you get infected. Like, why are we doing this?
Well, I mean, I
love it.
I remember switching from, my buddies and I, we were playing D&D and all this other stuff. And I think the big thing when it first came out, at least for us, was like, oh, we only need 6-sided dice. But I think it was the amount of 6-sided dice that kind of like freaked people out too. It was like, I need like, how many 6-sided dice? What's going on, man? I just want my, I just bought my set from the game store. It's got my 20-sided, so.
Right.
I think that was
you got all these different sized 6-sided dice.
It's like, I just want, but I think
you gotta admit also, like back in the day, you'd buy your like polyhedral set of dice and you'll be like, what do you mean I don't have to use any of these? I want to use all of these.
It's like, why did I spend my hard-earned $7 or $4 back then, right?
Yeah.
But then you counter that with like the drama of a handful of dice you're throwing at that table, man. It's like, it is addictive.
It was totally bragging rights. That's totally what it was, right? I'm dropping all these dice. Ha.
Yeah.
And we always used to joke about, the game master says, okay, the street samurai, whoever attacks, then you hear, boom, behind the screen. You're just like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
What was that? How many dice was
I have
that?
some 6-sided dice from you guys. You got some dice I can borrow here. Let me just give
The GM just pulls out a bucket.
Yeah. 5 pounds of dice. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's true. Like the first time you have to do a check and you roll 10 dice, you're like, okay, this is the game for me.
It's so much more visceral than like a plus modifier, right? It's like if I give you a target number of fucking 13 or something, if it was like if the mechanics worked as if you roll 1d6 and you have a modifier you add, it just doesn't feel like you got much power there. But if you're like, I have 10 dice I'm rolling, it's like I might be able to get that. It's a very empowering feeling to have 10 dice and go, I got a good chance I'm going to roll a couple of 6s, and then I got a good chance to roll those another 6.
And then you don't. And you're like, how?
And then you don't, but you felt like you could.
Yeah.
Yep.
How did that happen?
Potential is there.
Yeah, it's funny. Somebody earlier mentioned Vampire, and I did some writing on Vampire also as a freelance while I was at FASA. And I didn't, despite what some RPG history books say, I didn't do any system work on the game. And what I'm referring to is Sharon Appelklein's history of role-playing games. What's it called? I got it over there. Designers and Dragons says that I redid the Shadowrun dice mechanic for Vampire, which I did not do, and I told Shannon multiple times that I did not do it, but still, that's what the book says. That's what it says. But I did talk to Mark Reinhagen about it, and I distinctly remember a phone call where he said, "Yeah, the Shadowrun dice mechanic really works better with D10s." And I was like, "Really?"
Stab in the heart. You bastard.
Because we shifted to D6s very late. And didn't change much in terms of target numbers and all that. So it's a little funky, and you get that weird 5-6 or 6-1,
6-7.
Yeah, the 6-7 plateau. Where it was supposed to have been up at 10-11. That you would get to rarely.
Right.
But when we went to 6s, it shifted all the way down, and we said, oh, well, that sucks. But it's applied equally, so it's not the end of the world. You know, it works that way. There's this weird quirk in the rules of physics that happen.
Right.
For everybody.
My players get really excited about that, where it's like, it's target number 7. They get horrified for a second. And they're like, okay, that's basically a 6.
Yeah, it's
and they calm down.
Same number.
And what I think really works well for players too is like when they have whatever the target number is, when somebody rolls a 24, they're like, I feel like I should get something extra because I rolled a 24 on one of these dice. I'm like, it's still only 2 successes, friend.
I mean,
you always roll 24s on attack rolls and never on availability rolls.
I love the exploding dice system. I love that. I think that's one of the sad things about the streamlining in later editions, where they have the static target number and it's about number of successes. It's like at a certain point you don't even roll, because if you don't have enough dice to match the number of successes needed, it's impossible for you to even achieve or succeed. Whereas in this, technically you could succeed no matter what. There's a chance, there's a snowball's chance in hell that with 3 dice you might be able to hit like a target number 24. You know what I mean? It's not going to happen, but you could.
And then you build this stuff up with Tina, and then you're like, we're holding our breath going, did she make it? Did she make it?
It happens. Yeah, it happens. We've had that happen in our table.
The dice stuff made the game show really well at conventions.
Right? I'm sure.
When you had people, when I was demoing it, and you would have people come up and watch you play, you played up that drama.
I do it by myself in my room on Roll20.
But it was always,
like, man, I'm a badass.
How many dice do I get? Well, you get 3 for that, plus 3, plus 1, so you're going to roll 7 dice. You need to hit it. But okay, roll those again. Really? Keep rolling,
Yeah.
And they didn't know the rules, so we just keep rolling. Excellent. Okay, so...
Yeah.
Good job. You're way over what you need, but good job.
One of my players, he keeps rolling regardless of whether he's already succeeded, and it's so annoying, but I'm not going to stop him. He's having a good time.
Yeah.
He's like, and an 18. I'm like, target number was 6. And
well, you keep 6s, though. You want to keep going and see how far you get.
That's true.
Even if it's academic, it's satisfying.
Yep.
Yeah. And I do weird things. I'll give them a little cooler bonus thing if they roll over the target number, even that's not technically something I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
But if it's like, you rolled a 6, so you really did a great job on this thing.
Give them a little more description as part of the...
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing with being a game master is, when to embellish a little bit to keep them hooked and keep wanting to play. Because if you're so clinical about it, they're like, no thanks, we're good. Right? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, totally. It's so funny. We've just been talking, and I have my notes here. I'm going to try to continue the facade that there's any order to this. But I'm on the metahumanity section now. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's already answered, because the CAS, you mentioned that there's not really any correlation to like the original Confederacy there. Aside
from a couple, iconography used to troll the Yankees, which would have really kicked into overdrive in the later 2080s.
Yeah.
But I noticed that the scientists that give sort of the descriptions on the different meta-human races are from the CAS. Mm-hmm. And then it mentions that they treat them like creatures, which I thought was interesting.
Well, and I also thought...
The interesting bit about that is that when they talk about humans, they talk about, though the humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, are widely considered to be the normal metahuman, this is inaccurate, as all metavariants are normal. But then they go on to say that elves are all vegetarians.
Well, and that's the thing that I think is fascinating about this metahumanity section, because at the beginning they say there's a note about how this is an excerpt from a study by a CAS scientist, and their biases will be maintained in this text. So on a certain level, they say at the beginning, keep the stuff you want to keep as a game master. The other stuff is biased, and I love that flexibility in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why
that sense that,
specifically
like,
has the line, the authors also tend to view personal or cultural traits as genetic predispositions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like they say elves are vegetarian, but maybe it's just certain elves are vegetarian, and
Like maybe they
they're
interviewed
ascribing.
some tree hugger from the Salish.
Right. Right.
Well, and the gestation period of being so precise too. Obviously it's an average, and it's funny to.
Yep.
I don't know.
No,
it's
exactly. It's exactly
to the minute.
to that number. You can time it.
It's the future, man.
You know, you weigh the mother. You know exactly how heavy the baby's going to be.
It's awesome.
I love how the
I mentioned this in the chat yesterday, but I was like, I had never ever, I hadn't realized that at least in this version of the trolls have longer arms, and that's why it sort of implied that trolls have longer proportioned arms, and that's why they have +1 reach. That's kind of what's implied in the statement. I've like all these years, I've been just treating trolls as like really fucking big humans.
Right.
And that this description is like, oh, these are actually more like a Scandinavian troll where their arms are a little bit longer and they hunch a little bit. Never even noticed that because I'd not actually closely read this text before we did this reread, and I was like, holy crap, I didn't know. I've been playing this wrong all this time.
I picked up on a lot of fun stuff like that. Like when I was showing my players this book, one of them pointed out, he laughed at the fact that it pointed out how many meme they have, and it's always 2.
It's always 2. Yeah.
And he's like, why point that out if it's always 2? And then I'm like reading it, I'm like, well, because they're treating it like creatures.
It's a scientific
it's not,
study.
Yeah, the amount of teeth are all the same. It's like they can't just admit that these are humans.
Oh no, they do it to humans as well. Note is that they treat all of Homo sapiens like it comes across almost as if the author is an alien of some kind. Yes, Homo sapiens sapiens and the various subspecies. What a fascinating planet.
Yep. And yeah, you can figure birth and gestation down to the hour, because for humans it's 266 and a half days.
Yes.
With some
always at noon.
With some
So when exactly was this child conceived? Hold on, calculator.
Right.
All right, we'll see you on,
It's great. And going back to, the first time we met, we talked a little bit about this, that I love how like the fact that they let you draw your own conclusions, that like with the Shadow talk and Shadowland speak in the source books and stuff, like it's all sort of shaped around rumors that you can kind of pull from how you feel it should work in your game. It's not like a hard and fast truth and how things work. And I feel like that section did it too. It's like it tells you right from the beginning that this isn't real. Like it's what is believed to be true, but there are biases, and you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt to a certain extent. And I feel like
just Unreliable narrator is awesome.
Yeah, I love that flexibility as a game master, like, because players come to you and say, well, it says this in this book, in the source book, and you're like, yeah, because that person is lying to you. It's not like that.
Right.
Oh yeah, you read this? Well, it was posted by Plan 9, so probably not the most reliable of sources.
Right. I have a 50-year-old orc in my game, and someone called me out and like, well, orcs don't live that long. And I'm like, well, typically.
Some of them do. In fact, it's actually, if I remember correctly, it's noted that the orcs who have goblinized tend to have their normal human lifespans, and their descendants have a higher chance of having normal human lifespans.
I mean, a lot of humans die at 35, so the averages are all screwed up.
Right. Humans live longer than 55 years. Yeah. So, and that's the limit here. So orcs live longer than they're listed.
In 55 years, because I'm running out of time then.
Yeah.
It's the cyberpunk average. They all die a lot younger. So
yeah, we were all born dying. So,
and it's good to know for all of them that the breeding season is unrestricted.
Right.
Yeah, it really,
That really
does
opens
read.
up. Yeah, that really opened up a lot of possibilities at my table for sure.
Yeah, the restricted breeding season would just be too much.
Bob Charette, by the way, wrote all those.
They're really funny. They're fun.
And he was I think part of his background is in biology, so he was, I think, taking the piss out of some aspects of.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I love about ShadowTech is it's written by people who know their stuff. Like, I love older editions of Shadowrun because it is all not necessarily hard sci-fi. That's impossible to really do with the setting with magic, but firm sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
The magic feels firm, feels real, feels like it was written by someone that has studies it, and I think it really says a lot, Tom, that you're a writer and a game designer, that you're able to sort of rope that in and, like you said, write it in a way that explains it to people that don't know anything, don't know Paul Humes, and explain it how it works and how it's going to work in this game. It's awesome. I learned a few things reading through this section as well, that orcs have 4 babies. I didn't pay attention to that before. So that's different than humans.
And it's also noted that in human orc, elf orc, pretty much any pairing where one parent is an orc, the kids are orcs, which puts the orcs slur breeder into entirely different contexts.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting. Oh, I also saw that trolls regenerate teeth. I'll be using that in my game. I feel fine knocking the teeth out of my troll now.
Have a section of the orc underground revert to an almost Warhammer 40,000 economy where they use teeth as currency. Because we're the biggest and the strongest.
Well, yeah, I love that it is true. It's like there's these cool little tie-ins to like traditional fantasy, right? That you come at this as like, these are humans, these are different variants of humans, but then there's these little nods to like, not entirely. There's something deeper there.
We should be glad how they had into Obsidian.
It mentions during the goblinization, like these people were having nightmares of goblins, and it's really cool. Like it just ties it back to traditional fantasy again.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I really loved is the combination of the early fantasy, Unreliable narrator. All this came to a head in one of the best characters I ever played, who unfortunately died because the LC was falling apart. Is that the man had pretty much yes ranks in magical theory. So one time in the best role-playing thing I've ever done, he laid out his entire theory of magic, and I had discovered Earth Dawn by then, so I managed to. There's plenty of stuff that was objectively true, enough to get him the side eye if any immortal elves had been listening in, but there was also plenty of it filtered through his own hermetic bias, because the man was the consummate hermetic who read the Corpus Hermeticum every night before the bed.
That's awesome.
So I took all the magic stuff from Shadowrun and Earth Dawn, but also filtered it through someone who knows quite a lot more than the average Joe. In fact, he was probably in the top 10% of magic experts, but also he's a sixth worlder, and so doesn't know the whole story like a dragon would.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he was also hilariously and deliberately underpowered because he was primarily an academic, but that didn't stop him from when, the going got tough, he would pour all of his power into a Force 12 lightning bolt and then just pass out from the drain.
That is awesome.
Yeah, he could vaporize one enemy per session and then just take a nap.
Faint. Drain, baby, drain.
That's all you need. Just have your friends carry you away after you've taken care of things.
Well, and it turned out to diffuse a lot of situations. If you see someone, just, Dr. Manhattan in front of you, you're probably going to get a lot more peaceful.
That's true. Willpower saves everyone. That's a good point that you mentioned Earth Dawn. And I know, Tom, you mentioned that was sort of being written around the same time as, was it being written the same time as first edition or right after?
It was after.
Okay.
We were into second. if I remember correctly. Let me check one thing. Yeah, so we were working on second as it was coming together because it was published in 93.
That's so crazy.
I still have my.
It's crazy to. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I still have my like Dawn book I bought out of Walden Books. I posted. I mentioned this a couple ways back, but my wife has gotten into rebinding books, and that book was nearly dead, and it is now rebound and has its own special new hardcover. But it's still got the punch out cards that came with the core book. Mm-hmm. They're like magic item cards that are punch out cards. They're still part of the book itself.
That's awesome. I've been trying to talk my wife into getting into rebinding books. It's not working.
It's apparently it's apparently not that complex. At least not. It seems like it takes about 4 or 5 hours in that neighborhood per book. But
if you know what you're doing.
Sure, yeah. I've seen YouTube videos and they are awesome. They're good at it, but I'm terrible at crafts. I can't fold a freaking piece of paper in half and make it match.
Yeah. I can't cut a straight line with a pair of scissors, so I am marvel at her abilities. So
you're a lucky man. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you.
she's in the room with me, so
like she's just rebinding my hardcover second edition right now. I'm like, damn it.
So what's the address? Send us all our books to?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for offering. So, that's pretty crazy though to think about, like, okay, not only are you writing this new edition, which hasn't really been done, you said in the industry, like you don't really make a new edition or revised edition in a couple of years after you've released the first product. You want to make it as backwards compatible. You want to make it completely backwards compatible for that very reason. And at the same time, you're writing this new product that takes place in the past that you're trying to link into this book, while you're also churning out all these source books to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we knew with Earth Dawn, it was only ever going to be referential, right? There was never going to be a crossover per se. There would be characters that existed in both. But, with the exception of, the meta questy stuff, like in Harlequin's Back, which could be accurate, might not be. Never the two shall meet, kind of a thing.
Right.
So there was always a lot of history has dulled their memories, and that's what they remember of this kind of stuff. So we had a lot of outs because we didn't want to limit either game to things that the other one said.
Right. It feels like it stays true to that whole vague truth thing that you've been doing with this as well, the untrustworthy narrator or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And even the immortal elves and the dragons, they don't remember everything the same way.
I mean, do you remember what happened, last Tuesday? Probably not.
Yeah.
They're like 6,000, 15,000 years old.
We say, as we make Tom remember what he did 30 years ago in this book.
I do not.
But I mean, it's like all of us. You remember key things, right? And then it starts to get fuzzy. It's like, I know this happened, but crap, who was there? Well, I know that guy was there because I killed him. But was his brother there? Was he the one in the gold? That kind of stuff. You're not sure until, 2,000, 3,000 years later, somebody shows up and says, I'm going to duel you because I was the guy in the gold armor and you killed my brother. Like, oh, fuck, it was you.
Was that something, I think you'd mentioned this before, but it was something you're kind of playing close to the chest, though. You didn't want people to know that they were in the same universe. But then did you say Weissman sort of kind of blew that?
No, we didn't. We wanted to keep it close to the chest that there was a history of magic going back thousands of years. And then in one of the first promo flyers that was done, Jordan wrote a whole little blurb of Aaron the Scribe talking to the Young Elven Technologist Guild. And he's like, back when I lived 5,000 years ago, we did this. It's like, no, that was supposed to be a secret, Jordan.
I mean, though I do like how this. I think it was the Shizhanger source book that talks about how all the other runners just look at it and then go, "Wait, what the fuck?"
Yeah. So we had
also the linguists tearing their hair over Sporethiel because it's a conlang. It's existed for less than 10 years. So why does it not have any of the hallmarks of a conlang?
Yeah, and they did, and a lot of those older elves were egotistical sons of bitches.
Yeah,
So,
you don't survive like 10,000 years by being a nice guy.
No.
You survive by being an asshole.
Yeah. So they would tend to wield that kind of stuff like as a weapon, Well, do you know how old I am, young man? That kind of crap.
Back in my day.
When the pyramids, Yeah, sure you were. Yeah, exactly. Some of so that's what we always assume with Aaron is that he just, he maybe had one drink too many and got up in front of everybody and said, "When I was a young man and there were 3 suns in the skies and we had,
Crazy old man.
Yeah.
I had to walk to
Making a lot of
school
sense,
50 miles through the blood forest."
Yeah, exactly. And then when we started doing some of the fiction around it, we got cagey. I mean, that's why I wrote that whole Dunkelzahn Harlequin short story of Harlequin. Like, I think we should tell him what's coming. And Dunkelzahn's like, no, shut up. Don't tell him. But why did Dunkelzahn not want to tell him? What was the reason? The cynical reason says, because he was preparing a 17-part documentary on the subject himself, and it'd take another year before it would be ready and could be released. So he didn't want anybody talking about it. But more legitimately, he knew that if people understood this was how it all worked and this was going to happen, people would start dicking with it right away, and you couldn't trust people to make the right decisions. It's like, when the mana gets to this level, these bug creatures are going to come. What level? How do we get there? Wait. Is that what the Ghost Dance did? Oh, shit, let's do that, Welcome to Aztlan.
Aztlan, the Cthulhu-worshipping Aztec Nazis.
Yep.
Well, that's what's so cool about this. I mean, there's so many cool things, but just like I said, the very first image in this book, when you open the cover up, there's a fucking dragon. And it looks terrifying. And it's like, and then you start reading about how these corporations are bad and how, it's just so cool that there is this element of mystery there. Mm-hmm. I think that's what's so missing from like straight cyberpunk games. It's like the bad guy's the man. It's always the corpse. And with this, there's this kind of thing we don't quite understand. That's like even the corpse fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, adding the fantasy element in also just increased the tools in your toolbox in terms of storytelling. When I was playing Cyberpunk 2077, it's like, oh, I'll bet it's an AI. Because there's only 6 things it could be. Right. It's just, what kind of an AI? Oh, it's that kind. Okay. Where in Shadowrun, you're a little more off balance for a lot of it. Just, I don't know what that is. What could that be? Is it science? Is it magic? Is it some crazy thing that we don't know about? Is it, some dude with a holograph projector? I don't know.
Because I had one player in the LC who was very much into the technology's ascendant. The UCAS army could totally fight Vergigorm on even ground.
Yeah.
I shut him up by pointing out, look, the UCAS army might be able to fight Lofweir. Lofweir would be he wouldn't even be breakfast for Vergigorm. Lofweir is the popcorn that fell beneath the theater seat.
Well, that's what's so cool is when you see, I don't know a whole lot about the metaplot on it, admittedly, but it seems like the dragons are like, they obviously kind of suck. They're not really out for us. They don't really give a shit about humans in terms of, some of them might be kind of humored by us, but for the most part, they've got their own plans. But it's like when they start to conspire to keep something bigger and badder and scare out, like that's pretty fucking terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like Lofweir is the epitome of lawful evil, but he's also trying to keep things that are much, much, much worse out.
He's trying to keep Earth Dawn from happening again.
Right.
Well, and there's a
Did
nice.
you hear that, Dr. Vauclair?
There's a nice little sort of a sense of inevitability about it too, because if we're thinking about the phases of magic, like it's gonna be the return of magic is only heralding the fact that it's gonna get really crappy later on, because as magic sweeps in and becomes much bigger force in the world, like a lot of the technology is just not gonna be sufficient. So there's some fun sort of doom and gloom on the horizon in that sense.
Oh, but that's also the secret kind of behind why some of the immortal elves and the dragons got involved in technology corporations. Is there something we could maybe make using all the shit that we've never had before, right? Every other time we've had the cycles, we haven't had this.
Never had Ghostbuster traps to catch Vergigorm in.
Yeah. We never had space lasers and shit like that. Okay. What will that do? Can we make something of that will do something?
Hey, Virgie, eat 3.5 grams of antimatter.
Yeah.
That is true. I mean, it's cool because because there's that offset built in of both sides of the coin, where there's kind of a hopefulness there that most other cyberpunk doesn't have. The fact that our humanity and just the life force of life itself has a power, that corporations and, transhumanism and cyberpunk dystopian futures can't fully, crush. The fact that, a whole tribe of Native Americans can just take half a country back from magic alone. And I think there's even a line in here that says, like, Mother Nature has chosen a side, and she's made sure that now everyone knows whose side she's chosen. It's really cool. I mean, it's, like you said, there's something in the cyber technology and the advanced technology that the awakened people have never seen before. And there's something with magic that technology can't quite overcome also.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also there's way too many people. There's never been this many people on the planet.
Yeah.
And they don't know what that's going to do, because living energy is mana energy.
The Gaia-sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you can guarantee there are some of them going, okay, well, if we kill half of them, how much longer does that take?
Well, it's interesting also because I think that's kind of where magic turns the cyberpunk a little bit on its side, right? Because magic kind of on a certain level, like in Cyberpunk 2020, magic isn't there, and so there is no hope. Megacorps are always going to win. But
not necessarily. Arasaka got absolutely shreked until they brought them back.
Shreked?
Yeah, right. In the original fluff, before it got retooled into red, Arasaka was screwed. Kei Arasaka was dead. Saburo was about to get his head chopped off by the JSDF.
On a certain level, though, like there's an economic power that you can't stand up to in Cyberpunk. And the fact is that, like, magic troubles that, right? Like, the existence of magic means that the little guy can still win. The little guy can actually whip up the Great Ghost Dance and kick everybody off his land. Mm-hmm. That's not present in other cyberpunk narratives like it is in Shadowrun. There's hope there because of that.
And in a way, it's like the most fucking punk. Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, and I don't know how much we got into it, but we did touch upon it in the early days, was when you had Lofweir and others taking over corporations, suddenly you had a literal mythic figure at the head.
Mm-hmm.
And you had these other corporations go, well, fuck, how do I compete with that? Well,
that CEO cannot be assassinated.
Yeah. What you do is you build up the mythology of your own CEO. You know, how much of Damien Knight's story came out of well, we got to build him up. We have to make Ares feel as big and scary a company as Seder Crop. Yeah. How do we do that? We and maybe they're real stories, maybe they're not. Who knows? But I know. We'll connect him to Echo Mirage. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And maybe he is. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But that it becomes, corporate communication becomes an entirely different thing.
And in a way, it's as true to real life as possible. Sure. It's like the narcissism has got to be there.
Yeah.
It's like, I do like Shadowrun because it differentiates its megacorps very, very well. There's Ares, which is basically Turbo Raytheon.
Mm-hmm.
There's Aztec Nazis who make all your food. There's Renraku, which is, Diet Samurai.
Mm-hmm.
The only really differentiated corps in Cyberpunk is Raven, who just want to make good cybernetics and are pretty chill. Militech, which is Team America World Police on even more synth cocaine. And Arasaka, which is founded because one man was angry that he couldn't plant a zero in the side of an American carrier.
Well, we knew...
Yeah, there's a ton of character.
But we also, we knew we were playing on a global scale. So, we needed to think about, okay, so who's dominating in Europe? Who's dominating North America? Who's dominating in Asia? Who's dominating in these, in these other areas? Because we knew that's where the stories were going to go. Because we were following Fass's model and writing all these novels. And we needed to have a lot to chew through for all that. And that was awesome. The fact that you had the novels that were pushing the story forward, right? That was always what the plan was for the novels. The novels would push the fiction forward, and the games would reflect a lot of that stuff. But we knew that when we would reveal something big, we would do it in the novels and the short stories and whatnot. And that's cool. That's what they did with BattleTech to a very great success.
Except for the Bird Alien novel, but we don't talk about that.
We do not talk about the Bird Alien novel. We do not talk about the Bird Alien. No.
I like also that that dragons are mentioned, but they're not. It's almost assumed that you're never going to see one.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm sure that was something that was you guys made a lot of. There's a lot of intention behind.
Yeah, it was, it was like, well, for the exact same reason, why doesn't Harlequin have stats? Because you can't beat him. You give him stats, somebody's going to figure out how.
Yeah, or see it as a challenge.
Right. So the same thing with the big dragons, the Loftweirs and all those. No, we're not going to give him stats. Because you're going to have, if you're ever going to fight him, you're going to need a narrative way you defeat him. It's not going to be because your dice exploded and you hit that 96.
I would allow that. If he exploded 96, I'd be like, okay, dude, fine.
But it was
the bullet itself doesn't hit Harlequin, but he is so overcome by the beauty of the shot that he dies of a heart attack on the spot.
Exactly. He keels over in awe. Until everybody leaves and the camera pans away and then he sits up and walks off.
He walks up, gives a wink to the camera, a bow, then just disappears.
Just disappears. Yep. Yeah, we originally, the Great Dragons, we certainly thought, no, the player characters are, they're going to be there for dramatic scenes, but not anything else. The philosophy of that changed a little bit with later developers and later editions, but that's fine.
Right. That's another distinguishing factor to me between this and D&D or other RPGs. It's like D&D, everything is built to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So this was, that just was a cool difference to me, was the fact that, it does keep you small. Even if you become a prime runner, if you somehow happen to fall ass backwards into a plot similar to like the Harebrained Schemes trilogy,
right,
you're still probably not going to fight a dragon.
Right. Well, and that's why when I wrote, I can't believe I'm going up on the name of the first novel I wrote.
It's not Night Pawn, is it?
It is. Thank you.
Night Spawn?
Night Spawn. Yeah. I couldn't get Burning Bright out of my head. I was stuck on that. Night Spawn. But that's part of why I wrote in that. Okay, they decide they're going to go against a dragon. How do they do that? Well, you need the space laser. You know,
the missile launchers. They had missile launchers. I remember that.
They did, but there was this. You know, that was all about corralling him, so the space laser could get a shot on him. You know, that's what that was all about. You know, it wasn't.
It wasn't like the missiles were going to get him. Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
The missiles were distraction. See?
Yeah. You know,
Worried about the missiles to not see the space laser coming.
Yeah. But you know, part of that was if that's ever going to happen, you know, it's going to be I call in a you know, Ares Macrotech owes me one. Can I borrow your space laser? You know, that kind of level of. And if you're paying attention, you realize it's government militaries that are driving a lot of that. Right. You know, it's not. You know, poor guy doesn't. You know, he's not making those. It's like, okay, no, we need. You know, this dragon has gone terrorist. He's doing all this shit. We need to make an example of him. And it may not even have fully worked.
Yeah.
But that was part of that was no. When you get to this scale, this is the scale you're at.
Yeah, it's almost like it's almost like a cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm.
Like these people are pretty much signing their death. They know it. They might not walk away from this.
Yep. It's like also in Bug City when they set off the nuke. It's like not going to solve all your problems,
but it might slow them down for a while.
It'll slow them down for a little while. Yep, but it's not going to solve your problems.
It goes back to the whole like, what if we half the pop? It's like if we kill things, we get rid of their ability to latch onto life force.
Yep.
Magic or whatever.
Yep. Well, maybe they'll knock the mana level down a little bit. Okay. Burn half the trees too while you're at it, just to be sure.
Right.
And get all that plankton and that algae and.
It's so cool how interconnected everything is too, because that the implications are that mages are probably going to have a hard time around there too, right? Because they draw from the same energies.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
As do the great dragons and the immortal elves.
Right.
So they're doing okay, and we're going to be limiting ourselves. But is that still something we have to do? Do we all agree on that? No, we will not all agree on that. So what kind of infighting does that create? Yeah, just want to let you know, next Tuesday, we're going to kill half the population of the planet. Just let you know. might want to not go outside about 2:00.
Right.
You're cool. Don't come to Earth tomorrow.
Yeah. Go grab your Italian beef sandwich now, because Chicago not going to be around.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that starts to get onto a level that isn't helpful for player characters in the game. You know what I mean? It's kind of fun to read some of it, but it doesn't help drive the game forward.
I mean, it is the setting for my current second edition campaign, so it works really well for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say
I'm doing I got this idea last year that like I watched Escape from LA, like that 90s cyberpunk movie, Kurt Russell.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, Bug City is walled in. Wait a second. And so I had my players create essentially characters with heavy restrictions, because I didn't want anybody buying a helicopter, for example. And they basically built characters who were somewhere in Chicago when the bug hive exploded and the wall went up. And so now the campaign is, okay, so you're in a refugee community in the middle of Chicago, and your objective is to get out. Oh.
Escape from Bug City.
Escape from Bug City.
That's amazing.
No, and of course I never watched Escape from New York before writing any of that stuff.
Oh, you should check it out.
I'm lying to you.
We'll believe anything you say, Tom.
Yeah, I believe everything you say.
We're recording this. You can create whatever narrative you want.
Tell me you invented the vampire the masquerade dice system, because I believe it.
Right. I never saw Nosferatu. I thought I invented vampires.
No.
I love it. I actually reading this. I mean, it's so. This whole introduction, it's just so visceral and imaginative. It does start to stir ideas for other campaigns. I'm thinking like, man, what if I set a campaign in like the 2030s, and like an Echo Mirage, like a team of Echo Mirage hackers, like that'd be pretty cool. It's just, there's so much, it's just so well done.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting, I hit my mute button. One of the reasons that I actually stick with the second edition rules is as if I had upgraded to a newer version of Shadowrun and I wanted to tell a 2050 story, which is my favorite. It was just my favorite era of Shadowrun, like meta narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The number of things I would have to retcon out of the rule system. Number of things I'd have to be like, okay, yeah, Delta Cyberware is not available yet. Oh, that gun, you can't have that gun. It doesn't exist yet. The amount of like just going back and undoing stuff in the game, it becomes a huge amount of extra work. And so one of the things that locks me into second and third edition in terms of rules is I can say, okay, here's the book, do what you want in it. And I don't have to be like, well, there's Delta Cyberware that you can't have, but technically it's just all the rules are latched so tightly into the narrative of the world at the time that it makes it really difficult to jump from edition to edition and actually tell the same kind of story.
Right.
Yep.
I thought that's something I think is really neat about second edition is like, and it kind of came up in earlier discussion, like the rules reflect the reality of the setting at the time of, 2050. It makes it easier to tell a 2050 story by sticking with the edition that's tied to 2050.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you really get the sense that the game mechanics and the writing of the world and the lore happen hand in hand and not something that was slapped on top of a pre-existing story of how the game works or vice versa. It just feels very integrated. And a lot of the, like, for me, like personally, I do like the third edition initiative. I got into a big heated fight with my brother once. We were talking about what edition we were going to play, and he's like, he convinced me, and I now agree with him that third edition initiative is better for my table. But still, like, I'd rather play second edition and make that change than play third, just because of the way the entire book is written from this sort of, it's written with that intent. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that it is like, fuck you, man. That Street Sam is way faster than you. He does get to go twice before you move. That's just the way it works. That there's a real audacity there that I like. It is what it is, and it's very pure. It's not really, not that the game isn't balanced. Like I think in the last time we talked, Tom, you'd mentioned that there was this sort of paper, rock, scissors balance to the game.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not so much you weren't worried about balancing a fireball versus a bullet. Obviously, fireball wins, but in other situations, certain things have advantages, and that's sort of where the balance comes from.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the fireball wins if you're standing in the middle of a street.
Right.
The bullet
in terms of raw power.
Yeah. Yeah. But, need more power sometimes in the magic than you do in the bullet. So that's why you have that, why that monobolt ramps the way it does.
Yeah. Well,
right.
And one thing I would say that I've experienced as a game master is, like, I play with a lot of new players. When I play Shadowrun, I have to convince people, hey, I'm the game master, I'm running this game, so you're going to play Shadowrun. And because of that, I play with a lot of people who have never, they don't know the meta game around wired reflexes. So they won't really build their characters with that in mind. And then it's actually really effective when you're running the game and you're like, hey, by the way, the Street Samurai comes up and he goes 3 times. And they're like, holy shit! Because none of them really knew that was coming. Whereas when you play with people who are really into the lore and really into the narrative, they're like, I'm not making a character who doesn't have three initiative dice. And when you come into the game with players who don't really know the power of the three initiative dice, they don't build like that. They don't build expecting that to be the default. And you end up with a much wider variety of characters, but also you end up with that being something you can drop on your players at some point and have them literally freak out because they didn't know that was going to be the thing they were dealing with. And I think also because I'm not all the way through the Pink Fohawk podcast. I'm about halfway through. I also noticed that your game does not have a ton of high initiative characters in it. And I feel like that's more accurate to what the world would really be like.
Yeah, someone with Wired Reflexes 3 is a capital big deal.
Right. It's not like when you play with role players or gamers, you sit down with them and they're like, yeah, we're all going to figure out how we get 3 dice. And that's not how quote unquote the real world. That's not how people live,
Yeah.
That's something that someone does in an extreme circumstance, not just what you start with as the default. And when you have that as how your characters are built, then Wired Reflexes isn't that big of a deal. It's not that game breaking because it doesn't occur very often.
Right. There's like the ultra badasses have it, basically.
Right. And
like you said, like my game was with newcomers that never played Shadowrun, and so that's sort of how the approach I take is I kind of give them more of a Shadowrun, like a cyberpunk game from the start, a very street level. They're not coming across much magic. They're not coming across much other things, and I'm just slowly drawing this curtain back, and they're like, "Oh fuck, what am I fighting? Goblins, or ghouls? We're fighting ghouls." I'm like, "Yeah, that's right," and they're just it's really fun to people come in, I think, thinking they know what this is. It's like, it's cyberpunk. I get it. All right. And then you throw something like that at them. I'm like, roll your willpower. Why? Because this guy's looking at you funny. Why? You feel a spell hit your soul. How about that?
Yeah. And I think that's another thing. Like, there are no dump stats in this game because, like, basically you can make like the fastest street samurai out there and dump all of your stats into physical, and then a mage goes like levels you with a mana bolt. So you're like, okay, so I do have to have willpower, so I have to take that out of something.
Yeah, because if you build exclusively physical and neglect your willpower, intelligence, not only do you not get very many skills, but the first mage can just go skedaddle skadoodle, your spine is a noodle, and you're dead.
Yeah,
right. It's that paper rock scissor balance we're talking about. It's like it's why the detective can be playable.
And I actually had one of the LCs I was on actually tried to prevent Street Sams from upping their willpower because if they show up their weaknesses, it's unbalanced. So mages couldn't get their physical stats too high, and Street Sams couldn't get their mental stats too high. But then everyone else turned to that one GM, and they got smacked down after a couple weeks.
That's where that burnout mage archetype comes in.
Well, I've made it through most of my notes, by the way, and I know we're coming on right over 3 hours here. So,
if anybody has anything else they wanted to ask me specifically, because I'm going to have to wrap it. I've got a meeting.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm going to do a couple rounds of Ready or Not before bed. But once again, thank you for being here, Mr. Dowd. I'm looking forward to the next session.
Absolutely. I feel like
this was super fun.
We're able to comb through this at a good pace. I feel like we got to get into the nitty gritty of the first 40 pages. So for next time, I was thinking, I love the character creation in this game. I love the priority system. I think it's so fun to create characters in Shadowrun. I know some people complain it takes a while. It's like a blast the whole way through for me. But maybe we go through that. And what do you guys think? You want to go through the skills as well? Or you want to stop before combat? Combat, I feel like might need to be its own thing.
Yeah, I feel like going through skills and character creation and archetypes is actually that's a good block, and it gives us some meat to go through.
Sure. Okay, so that's what we'll do for next time, and I'll come up with a date that works for everybody. And yeah, thank you guys. Tom, thank you so much again, man. It's so awesome. You obviously are all of our hero here, and it's so awesome you're doing this for us.
Never meet your
really
hero.
Cool.
Usually that's the truth, but it has been nothing but awesome. So thank you.
All right. You guys have fun. I will catch you next time.
Talk to you guys later.
Take care. Later. All right. I got about maybe 10 minutes. How you doing, Noish?
Muted there. I'm in good shape. It's early over here yet, relatively speaking.
Oh, you're West Coast, right?
Yeah, Oregon. So
right. Oh man, dude, you're right near this shit.
Yeah,
you're right near the homeland of Shadowrun.
Right in the middle of Ttrpg, however you say that.
That's about how I say it.
Ttrpg or Ttrpg or however it is. Yeah.
It's so funny because so I went on a job interview like a year or so ago, and I was just in the middle of like getting this game going with Pink Fohawk, like we're getting it off the ground kind of, so I was really pouring through a Shadowrun book, and I go on this job interview and it was in Seattle, and so I go there and I'm like, I've never been there, but I felt like I knew a lot about it. And it was this weird situation where like the person was like, "Oh, I live over on like Mercer Island," and I'm sitting here going, "Okay, it's not Council Island. It's not Council Island." I'm like trying to remind myself, "Don't say Council Island, you idiot."
I had that compound where for some reason people were talking about Seattle and what neighborhoods were good or not.
You did that too?
Yeah.
It's a problem, man. So there you have it. There's the first official meeting of the Shadowrun 2nd Edition Book Club. It's just so cool to be able to just find a lot of all these different enthusiasts on Shadowrun and just like actually go through it page by page almost. This book we love. So that was really cool. If you want to join the book club, check out the description below. We are in the Classic Shadowrun Discord. The invite link is below. You just to join that server. And then what you'll need to do is you can either DM me. My name is Pink Fohawk. I'm on the server. Message me if you have any questions. But you'll need to go into the 2nd Edition Book Club channel and look in the pinned messages there on how you can join the spectator role. When the time comes around, you can jump into the voice chat with all of us. You won't be able to use voice chat, and that's just so that we don't make sure we're not all talking over each other. We've already got like 20 people that are already signed up for the voice chat section of the book club. But you can still join the voice chat. You just won't be able to use voice. But you can text chat any of your thoughts or your questions or whatever. For next month, we are reading from page 40 all the way up until combat. So we're covering all of character creation as well as the skills chapter. That's what we'll be covering for this next upcoming month. I'm going to take this opportunity to plug our podcast as well. If you're in the mood for some Shadowrun actual play goodness, we run 2nd Edition fast and loose. It's action-packed. It's a great time. It's fun. It's ridiculous. You're going to love it. So check us out. We're available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. We'll see you out there in the shadows.